Chapter 66. Ning Shu hoped that these poor women who sought refuge with him could survive. At this time, they must train hard. Only then would they have a chance to survive on the battlefield. Sure enough, after the heavy snow stopped, Helian-ing led the Tatters to attack the city. Ning Shu stood on the city wall and met Helian-ying's eyes. Ning Shu was very angry. Why didn't this guy die? Was it because the poison was not deep enough? Didn't he vomit blood? Now he was alive and kicking. Helian-ing was wearing fur. His neck was furry. Obviously, he was wild and noble. He raised his head and looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu smiled coldly. He waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to carry the ladders to attack the city. The war drum sounded. Ning Shu shouted coldly, "Release the arrows." Suddenly, a rain of arrows flew towards the Tatters. The Tatters who were attacking the city were hit by several arrows. Some of them even became hedgehogs. Shoot again. The soldiers who were shooting arrows at the back immediately replaced the soldiers in front. Ning Shu saw many women being hit by arrows from the corner of his eyes. Ning Shu's heart trembled. Then he calmed his mind. Change to the catapults. This catapult should be considered a weapon with great destructive power in ancient times, especially when shot from a high place. Some of the Tatters climbed up the city wall with great difficulty. However, they were hit by ice and fell down from the ladders. They could not move. Helian-ing looked at the snow-covered objects on the city wall. He had a guess in his heart. He suddenly looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu smiled. Yes, it is as you think. These are the corpses of the Tatters. The Tatters hanging on the city wall revealed their dark eye sockets. The eyeballs inside were already gone. They were pecked away by birds. Either do not do it, or do it to the extreme. Helian-ying's complexion suddenly became very unsightly. She looked at Ning Shu with eyes that carried dense killing intent and treacherous entanglement. Her expression was incomparably dangerous. Ning Shu stretched out his hand and handed her a crossbow. Ning Shu pointed the arrowhead at Helian-ing. Helian-ing sneered at Ning Shu from a distance and pointed her bow at Ning Shu. Whoosh, whoosh, the two arrows whizzed through the air, even creating tiny sparks in the air. Ning Shu's pupils dilated as she looked at the arrow flying towards her. Ning Shu tilted her head, but the arrowhead still grazed her face. The wound was very small. "Princess, are you all right?" When Duan Xinghui saw this scene, he was so scared that his heart almost stopped. He finished off the Tatters who had already climbed up the wall with one slash, and Ning Shu ran over. Ning Shu smiled evilly as he wiped the blood off his face. He even stuck out his tongue and licked the blood on his fingertips. He did not pay attention to Mu Jinyu, but looked closely at Helian-ing. Duan Xinghui looked at Princess Jia Hui, who had an evil smile on her face and only felt his heart beating violently in his chest. The current Princess Jia Hui was incomparably charming. The bloodstains on her face even added a cruel and fatal beauty to her. Looking at Helian-ing sitting on the horse, Ning Shu was disappointed, but it was still within his expectations. If Helian-ing died so easily, Ning Shu would simply burn incense to the high heavens. In the end, the Tatters did not succeed in this siege. When the Tatters fled, their formation was scattered and panicked like fish that escaped the net. Ning Shu grabbed Helian-ing from a distance and then kissed her lips. Then, she turned her horse around and ran away. Ning Shu pursed his lips. This was the most annoying thing about the Tatters. If they could not win, they would run away. Fighting with them required a lot of energy. Ning Shu was very angry. He pulled his bow into the shape of a full moon and the arrowhead rushed towards Helian-ying's back. "Princess, Helian-ing is very crafty. He is deliberately running away. If Princess chases after him, you will fall into his trap. Cavalry is suitable for fighting on the plains." Duan Xinghui looked at Ning Shu's unwilling expression and could not help but persuade him. "You are a precedent for failure. I will not foolishly chase after you," Ning Shu said to Duan Xinghui. Then he shouted loudly, "Clean up the dead soldiers and register them." Duan Xinghui was speechless. Duan Xinghui felt that his good intentions were treated as ill intent. Furthermore, Princess Jia Hui tore open his wounds like this, making him feel embarrassed and a little sad. Right now, Princess Jia Hui completely regarded him as an enemy. It was not appropriate to call him an enemy. He had no power or influence. She had never considered his feelings when she spoke. What made Ning Shu sad was that half of the more than 100 women were now dead. Yesterday they were still alive. Today they had become corpses. There was not even anyone to collect their corpses. Ning Shu asked Kai Sang to bury these corpses and register their names. They were women, but they were also heroes. They should not be deprived of the praise they deserved because of their identity. They should be left in the history books. The expressions of the surviving women became more determined. Even though their faces were very pale now, their eyes were very determined. In the following time, the Tatters seemed to be tireless in attacking the city. Ning Shu could even see that Helian Ying's face was anxious. It was probably because of the heavy snow and the army did not have any provisions. Also, the winter provisions of the entire northern desert were obtained by plundering. Now, they could not even break through the city wall. Helian Ying looked at Ning Shu who was standing on the city wall. This year, because of this princess, they would not let them in even if they died. In the past, the guards would symbolically guard the city. Then, when they were defeated, they would let them in to plunder and then return to the northern desert. Princess Jiahui, Li Shuishan, this woman, Ning Shu also felt a lot better in his heart. He looked almost numbly at the soldiers being carried away. However, so many people had already died. They could not give up. If they compromised this time, then there would be a next time, and a next time. Would these people die in vain? There was another more important reason. That was, if they lost, these hateful Tatters would enter the hinterland and plunder everything. At that time, the northern desert would propose a marriage alliance, which would also disappoint Li Wen. Therefore they had to hold on. During this period, because Duan Xinghui had made a lot of contributions, he was directly promoted to the right vanguard by Shenfeng. He was almost on the same level as Ning Shu. He was indeed the world's favorite. With luck on his body, he was like a fish in water in this kind of war. How lucky was he? Ning Shu clearly saw the arrow whistling towards Duan Xinghui, but the one who was shot was the soldier beside Duan Xinghui. Ning Shu was speechless at that time. He did not know what Shenfeng liked about Duan Xinghui. Shenfeng praised him so much that Duan Xinghui, who was still a soldier, became the third person in the military camp. Now, Duan Xinghui was qualified to command the battlefield. He stood beside Ning Shu and looked at Helian Ying with gnashing teeth. Ning Shu's nerves had been tense all this time. Especially when he saw that her female troops had casualties, Ning Shu's heart ached. However, as time went by, the casualties were getting smaller and smaller. These women's bodies were full of valiant chi. They were not worse than men. These remaining were all good seedlings. Helian Ying retreated again. Before she retreated, she looked at Ning Shu with cruel and excited eyes. This made Duan Xinghui, who was standing beside Ning Shu, feel very uncomfortable. Chapter 67. Helian Ying seemed to be at odds with Ning Shu. Other than when it was snowing or raining, he would attack the city. It was as if he was doing the 8th set of radio calisthenics. However, blood flowed like a river. Ning Shu simply wanted to curse. He stood on the city wall and looked down at that bastard Helian Ying. This battle was all about money and food. Just a day's worth of food was a terrifying number. He didn't know how long he could last. Moreover, Ning Shu looked at Grand Marshal Shenfeng's attitude. It seemed that he didn't want to persist. However, if he didn't persist, so many lives and so much investment would be wasted. He could only drag it on like this. Ning Shu received another letter from Li Wen. It was a private letter for him. Li Wen's meaning in the letter was very clear. Although he hoped that Ning Shu could win the battle, he hoped that Ning Shu could persist and have a strong attitude. At the end of the letter, there were some words of concern. It sounded a little like an elder brother. As for how much sincerity there was, Ning Shu didn't want to delve into it. As an emperor, every action and every word had a deep meaning. Today, the weather was very good. After a day of wind and snow, the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow. Ning Shu originally thought that with such bad weather, it would be difficult to even walk and that Helian Ying wouldn't attack the city. He didn't expect that he would still attack the city. Moreover, The Tatars' faces were filled with anxiety and desperation. It was now late winter. However, there was no harvest this year. Even the calm Hellion Ing frowned. His expression was very cold. He raised his head and squinted at Ning Shu, who was standing beside the flag. The bright and beautiful sun shone on her body. Her armor emitted a cold light. It was so dazzling that even Princess Jia Hui's face couldn't be seen clearly. Duan Xinghui stood beside Ning Shu. Seeing that Hellion Ing kept looking at Princess Jia Hui, he felt very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but say to Ning Shu, "Princess, the Tatars of the northern desert are ambitious. Princess, you must not compromise." Ning Shu couldn't help but want to dig out her earwax. She basically heard these words every day. It seemed that Duan Xinghui was a man of few words. In front of the original Princess Jia Hui, he always had the appearance of a cool brother. Now that he was nagging, it was really annoying. Hellion Ing pursed her lips and looked at the couple on the city wall. She couldn't help but shoot at Duan Xinghui with her bow and arrow. She didn't know if it was because of the strong wind today, but the arrow that was flying towards Duan Xinghui was actually shot towards Ning Shu. Ning Shu, as expected, the unlucky ones who stayed with Ninju Jun would always be cannon fodder. Ning Shu wanted to dodge, but her body suddenly lost control, and her soul seemed to be ejected out of her body. Ning Shu was shocked. What was going on? Why did she suddenly lose control of her body? Duan Xinghui saw the arrow speeding towards Princess Jia Hui. Furthermore, Princess Jia Hui still had a blank expression, not knowing how to dodge. Panic surged in Duan Xinghui's heart. He hurriedly used his saber to slash at the arrow. However, the arrowhead still shot towards Ning Shu. The arrowhead lost its aim and pierced into Ning Shu's shoulder. Ning Shu groaned. The sound of the arrowhead piercing through flesh rang out in her ears. Immediately after, an earth-shattering pain engulfed her entire brain. Damn, it's so painful. Ding. Counterattack mission completed. Do you wish to leave this world? A cold mechanical voice sounded out in Ning Shu's mind. Yes, yes, yes. Ning Shu only wanted to quickly leave this world. It was too painful. Even if she wanted to leave this world, she didn't have to stab herself with an arrow. The system tricked me. In an instant, Ning Shu's soul left Princess Jia Hui's body. Everything happened too quickly. By the time everyone reacted, they realized that a great young commander had been killed. The northern desert Tatars beat their chests and cheered, their morale soaring. They looked at their second prince, Hellion Ing, with gazes of worship and reverence. As for Hellion Ing, who was viewed as a hero, he tightly gripped his bow, trembling slightly. His face was pale and his eyes trembled. She could have clearly dodged. With her strength, she shouldn't have been unable to dodge this arrow. Furthermore, the person he wanted to kill wasn't her. Hellion Ing raised his hand and loudly shouted, "Beat the gongs and retreat." This, now was clearly the best time to attack the city. Why did they have to retreat? Second prince, right now is the time when Great Yong's morale is at its lowest. Attacking the city now is twice the result with half the effort. Why do we have to retreat? A Tatar commander asked Hellion Ing. Slap. Hellion Ing slapped the commander's face. Gnashing his teeth, he said, "This prince said to retreat, so we will retreat." Hellion Ing turned his horse around and glanced back at Princess Jia Hui's position. There was no one there. In a daze, he saw a pair of clear and cold eyes, aloof yet filled with disdain and craftiness. She shouldn't die so easily. Carrying Princess Jia Hui, Duan Xinghui rushed to the military doctor's tent and loudly shouted, "Save her, quickly save her." Duan Xinghui waited outside the tent, anxiously pacing back and forth. Right now, Duan Xinghui was anxious, fearful, and terrified. He also had an intense desire to not let Princess Jia Hui die. However, when he thought that this woman who looked down on him would die, Duan Xinghui's heart felt like it was in a pot of oil. When the arrow was pulled out, Princess Jia Hui let out a muffled groan. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at the simple and crude tent. How was she still alive? She was still in the Tatar tent of the northern desert. Pain assaulted her, and Princess Jia Hui fainted. Seeing that Princess Jia Hui was fine, everyone in the military camp breathed a sigh of relief, especially Shun Feng. Although swords and sabers had no eyes on the battlefield, the death of a country's princess, who was of the same mother as the emperor, didn't matter how many meritorious deeds he had performed. The emperor wouldn't care. However, Princess Jiahui felt as if she was in a dream. She didn't know if she had seen her previous life before being shot by the arrow, or if the current situation was just a dream. Looking at the women kneeling before her, their expressions were solemn and respectful. When they saw her, their eyes were bloodshot. Touching the whip in her eye, Princess Jiahui smiled. No matter what, she was no longer as miserable as she was in her dream. She wasn't humiliated by others, and she wasn't in the pain of living in the ceaseless pain. She didn't disappoint her imperial brother. She was the most honorable princess of the great Yong dynasty. When she saw Duan Xinghui, Princess Jiahui smiled. This man, whom she had loved so much in her dream, was currently looking at her with a worried expression. So what if she was a woman? Women weren't necessarily inferior to men. She was willing to remain unmarried for the rest of her life and fight for her imperial brother for the rest of her life. No matter how painful it was, it couldn't compare to being shared by many men eating pig's food, living a life that was neither human nor ghost, living without dignity, not knowing why she lived. Even if it was like a dream, this dream was so real. Princess, are you all right? Finally, Duan Xinghui stepped forward and asked. Under the princess' meaningful and strange gaze, he asked Princess Jiahui. Princess Jiahui stared blankly for a moment. It seemed that she hadn't heard Duan Xinghui's voice for a long time. Chapter 68. As if to ascertain whether Princess Jiahui was truly all right, Helian Ying soon arrived to attack the city. Seeing Princess Jiahui standing on the city walls, he laughed. Helian Ying laughed. She laughed very happily. Princess Jiahui looked at Helian Ying. This man, this demon-like man, could actually laugh like this. A cruel and treacherous man would never laugh like this. What was he laughing about? Could it be that seeing that she had not died, he was so disappointed that he had lost his mind? Princess Jiahui touched the whip at her waist, coldly snorting. Shoot the arrows? Duan Xinghui looked at her. The current Princess Jiahui was even more noble and proud, as if she had been reborn. The current Princess Jiahui did not have her previous cold demeanor, appearing even more luxurious. As she pursed her lips, her temperament became different. Duan Xinghui was confused by the ever-changing Princess Jiahui. Previously, Princess Jiahui had looked at him with extreme coldness. When she looked at him, it was as if she knew his secret thoughts, her eyes filled with mockery and disdain. The current Princess Jiahui looked at him with treacherous eyes, with a hint of rejoicing and even more relief. Immediately after, she looked at him as if he was a stranger. Duan Xinghui was speechless. Duan Xinghui felt as if his heart was being torn apart. Looking at Princess Jiahui's back, he felt as if he had lost something important. His heart suddenly felt empty, so empty that it was unbearable. This battle continued until the beginning of spring. When the snow melted, Helian Ying led the remaining soldiers back to the grasslands. Before leaving, he looked at Princess Jiahui with a treacherous gaze. Princess Jiahui sneered. She was no longer the pitiful woman in her dreams. She would forever be Great Yong's most noble Princess Jiahui. After returning to court, when she saw Li Wen, tears welled up in Princess Jiahui's eyes. In this world, only she and her imperial brother were family. Li Wen looked at Princess Jiahui with gratification. After a while, he said, "You've changed again?" Princess Jiahui did not understand. Li Wen decreed that Princess Jiahui could be buried in the imperial mausoleum 100 years later and enjoy the pleasures of the world. This was an enormous honor. No other princess had ever received such honor. Although the princess was the emperor's younger sister, she was still a woman. After marrying, she would belong to another family. This kind of honor caused all the court officials to grumble. Li Wen didn't say anything and directly sent the ministers who strongly opposed to the idea to the border to guard it. He enjoyed the bustling life in the capital, and it was easy for him to talk. He also went to the border to guard it. Next, it was time to award Duan Xinghui according to his contributions. Li Wen looked at Princess Jiahui. Princess Jiahui said indifferently, "Just award him according to his contributions." "Royal brother, You don't have to worry about me. When Duan Xinghui learned that he had been promoted to level 2 Agile Cavalry General, he felt very complicated. Looking at Princess Jiahui who was sitting in front of the palace, Duan Xinghui felt even more complicated. Duan Xinghui returned to the Duan residence at the speed of a tortoise. He did not feel the slightest bit of urgency in his heart. His mood was abnormally heavy. It was undeniable that he was very regretful. The gate of the Duan mansion was unusually lively. Duan Xinghui, dressed in armor, returned in glory. Madame Duan looked at her son and cried tears of joy. She said with heartache that he had become darker and thinner. Duan Xinghui's eyes swept over Yuan Dong and finally rested on Arya. She was wearing a lake blue silk dress with a hairpin in her hair. She looked happy and showed her teeth. But then she realized that it was inappropriate and quickly pursed her lips. Arya quickly showed Duan Xinghui a smile without showing her teeth. But she didn't know that such a smile made her look very timid and even self-abased. In just one winter, Arya no longer had the freedom, simplicity, and beauty that Duan Xinghui saw. Now Arya's every move was so awkward, like a puppet. Duan Xinghui saw the smile on her face, and the face of Princess Jiahui appeared in his mind. She could even stick out her tongue to lick the blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked evil and charming, which was breathtaking. Arya was very excited that Duan Xinghui married her. At the banquet, Duan Xinghui drank a lot and even shed tears. Maybe he was mourning, or maybe he was regretting. Duan Xinghui and Arya's life was not so good. Duan Xinghui gave Arya the position of his wife, but he didn't fulfill the promise of being with her for the rest of his life. He had other women around him. Without Princess Jiahui, Duan Xinghui didn't care about other women or how many women he had. There was no happiness in his life. Arya was not reconciled, but she had to endure it. She had to endure the man rolling with other women. Her heart was full of holes. Right now, Princess Jiahui had become the bright moonlight in Duan Xinghui's heart. What he couldn't obtain was the best. Duan Xinghui would never be able to obtain Princess Jiahui in this lifetime. Princess Jiahui had become a celestial concubine. After the war, an envoy from the northern desert came and said that they were willing to sign a treaty of non-aggression for 100 years. But there was one condition, which was to let Princess Jiahui marry the second prince of the northern desert, Helian Ing. Princess Jiahui smiled. She would rather die than enter the northern desert. This time, before Princess Jiahui said anything, Li Wen objected. After the envoy from the northern desert left, Princess Jiahui told Li Wen that she was willing to guard the border. She was even willing to stay unmarried for the rest of her life to resist the Tattars of the northern desert. Princess Jiahui said frankly that no man in this world was worthy of her. Li Wen joked, "If you meet a man as excellent as my royal brother, you won't marry him?" Princess Jiahui smiled, "There is only one person like my royal brother in this world. There is no other." Duan Xinghui was in the hall when he heard Princess Jiahui say this. He remembered that Princess Jiahui said a long time ago that he was the best man in the world. Now, Princess Jiahui couldn't see his figure in her eyes. Princess Jiahui traveled through the night and returned to the border. Leading her female soldiers, she patrolled the city walls. She saw a row of Tattars' corpses hanging on the city walls. Without the ice and snow covering them, the Tattars' corpses revealed their original appearance. They revealed sinister and painful expressions as they turned into dried corpses. Kai Sang said to Princess Jiahui, "Now, the Tattars don't dare to look at these corpses. The Tattars who come to the city to trade don't dare to be arrogant. The commoners here all call the princess the goddess of war. They even say that they want to erect a plaque and statue of the goddess of war." Princess Jiahui smiled and didn't say anything. However, not long after, an enormous stone statue was erected in the city. It was a statue of Princess Jiahui dressed in armor. Her hair was raised high and swayed in the wind. Her eyes were proud and noble, and a whip hung from her waist. Looking at this enormous statue, tears streamed down Princess Jiahui's face. She was Great Yong's noble princess, the revered Princess Jiahui, not a filthy princess. Chapter 69. When Ning Shu returned to the system space, she couldn't help but touch her shoulder. Even now, she still felt pain. After being a normal person for so long, Ning Shu hadn't been in so much pain for a long time. Only when undergoing chemotherapy would it be so painful. Ning Shu almost forgot that she was once a patient. Looking down at her body, Ning Shu sighed. Her soul dimmed a little. She quickly sat down and absorbed the energy of the system space. Ning Shu thought of the peerless martial art. She simply followed the route of the peerless martial art. This speed was too slow. Ning Shu thought of the peerless martial arts mental cultivation method. She didn't know if it would work. She was now a soul. Without a body or meridians, how could she use the mental cultivation method? She felt drunk. Ning Shu sat on the ground with her eyes closed. She didn't know what material it was, but what made Ning Shu surprised was that the speed was faster. Moreover, the material felt very comfortable when it was introduced into her soul. It was a cool feeling. Ning Shu was in the middle of doing it when a cold mechanical voice sounded in the system space. Congratulations, player, for returning. Do you want to see the information page now? Ning Shu had just answered when a screen appeared in front of her. On it was her information. Number 23333 name, Ning Shu age, 27 experience, 7,100, 7,000/10,000, soul, 60 HP. 50 wisdom, 80 charm, 1 luck, 25 mental strength, 120 martial strength, 10 aptitude, 24 merit, 2 skills, 5th ring spear technique, trash fighting technique, beginner peerless martial art honorary title. Goddess of War. Ning Shu saw the title Goddess of War and was stunned. When did she have such a title? And it was a goddess? Forget it, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that she only had 3,000 points this time. Including the peerless martial art she had exchanged for, she only had a total of 7,100 points. There were also 2 merit points that she didn't know what to do with. She fought a bloody battle. She didn't know if the blood on her body was her menstrual blood or the blood of her enemies. In the end, she only got these few points. Alright, it was already good enough to have points. Being able to come back alive was already good enough. You've obtained 5 additional attribute points. Where do you want to add them? The space system asked. Ning Shu clicked on the screen. First, she clicked on the luck stat. Moreover, she was filled with grief and indignation. She realized that her luck was really bad. She was about to leave this world, but she still got shot by an arrow. It was so painful. After Ning Shu finished distributing the attributes, the screen changed. Serial number 23333 name, Ning Shu age, 27 EXP, 7,100, 7,000/10,000, soul value, 60 HP, 50 wisdom, 80 charm, 1 luck, 25, plus 3, spiritual power, 120 combat power, 10 aptitude, 24, plus 2, merit, 2 skills, 5th ring spear technique, trash fighting technique, trash entry-level peerless martial arts. Honorary title, Goddess of War. Do you want to enter the mission world? The mechanical voice of the system sounded. Ning Shu shook her head. I'll enter the world later. Her soul had been consumed by the previous world and had already become dim. Moreover, she had experienced slaughter in the previous world. She had changed from a good citizen to a general with blood-stained hands. She had to settle her emotions. If she didn't continue like this, she would go crazy. Ning Shu emptied her thoughts. She was only herself. She was Ning Shu. No matter what she had experienced, she was still herself. She might have lived for others, but she was still Ning Shu. Ning Shu didn't realize that her soul had become heavier. Her expression was relaxed and her eyes were closed. She seemed to be enjoying it. After an unknown amount of time, Ning Shu opened her eyes and looked down at her body. She felt that her soul was much more solid than before. She had to get enough points to get some secret cultivation manuals. Only then could she cultivate more effectively. I'm ready. I can enter the world, Ning Shu said. As soon as she said that, Ning Shu immediately felt dizzy. Fuck, it's always like this. Will it kill you to remind me? I'll give the system a bad review and scram. Perhaps it was because her soul had become stronger. Ning Shu didn't feel as uncomfortable as before when she was conscious. Instead, there were noises in her ears. "You're an adult. Why are you being so calculative with a child?" A cold and clear voice said. "Besides, Dabao didn't do it on purpose. Why are you acting like this? Ran, look at yourself. Son-in-law, you're wrong to say that. Ran just lost her child. It's all because of that little bitch Su Meng's child. How can that child be justified in pushing someone?" A sorrowful female voice sounded. At this moment, the male voice sounded angry. "I don't want to hear anything bad about Su Meng from your mouth." Ning Shu heard these words and struggled to open her eyes. "Ran, you're awake?" A woman looked at Ning Shu with concern. Her eyes were filled with tears. Ning Shu nodded and moved his body. Then he felt waves down there. His stomach hurt as if a knife was scraping it. Ning Shu was stunned. What was going on? "Don't move. Don't move if you're not feeling well." The woman pressed down on Ning Shu's body. Ning Shu looked around. The smell of disinfectant lingered around his nose. It seemed like he was in a hospital. His eyes stopped not far from the bed. Ning Shu saw a man in a black suit. He was tall and straight. The suit looked very sexy on him. His expression was cold and handsome. He was in a black and white suit. His facial features were clear and handsome. His expression and eyes were cold. His entire body was filled with a domineering and handsome aura. He was a very charming man. But now, this man was staring at him with an unfriendly gaze. It was mixed with extreme disgust. It was as if he was some kind of enemy. Ning Shu blinked. She hadn't received the plot yet and didn't know what was going on. So, she kept quiet. The man looked at Ning Shu's pretentious attitude and sneered. He picked up the jacket on the sofa and left. The man's attitude made the woman who was comforting Ning Shu very angry. She looked at the man's back and was so angry that her body trembled. Then, she turned her head and looked at Ning Shu. She said sadly, "Ran, my daughter?" Ning Shu was very uncomfortable. Her stomach hurt. It couldn't be what she was thinking, right? "I'm tired," Ning Shu said. She had to accept the plot first. Then rest well. You're in confinement. Don't think too much. Rest well and we'll talk about other things. Mrs. Su said to Ning Shu. Ning Shu was dumbfounded. No wonder her stomach hurt so much. She had a miscarriage. She was an unmarried woman, yet she had skipped so many procedures. Now she had to go through a miscarriage and give birth to a child. Mrs. Su saw her daughter's strange expression and thought she was sad about the child. She quickly said, "Mom won't talk about it. Rest well." Mrs. Su wiped her tears. "Mom will go back and make chicken soup for you." Chapter 70. After Mrs. Su left, Ning Shu endured the discomfort in his stomach and flipped over. Then the lochia burst out. Ning Shu felt that life was full of evil. Why was it that every time she entered the world, she would either be beaten to death or starve to death? Now she had a miscarriage. She decided to add all her attribute points to her luck. Was her luck really that bad? What a scam! Ning Shu closed his eyes and began to accept the plot. However, this plot made Ning Shu feel like he was suffering from menstrual cramps and pain in the balls. This plot was very simple. It was a story of sleeping in the wrong bed, running away with the balls, and finally a happy family. Ning Shu's body was called Su Ran. She was the female lead, Su Meng's cousin, but they were rivals in love. At the beginning of the plot, Su Meng's parents died in a car accident. Moreover, this accident seemed to be a plot by this body's parents. One had to know that the fights between rich families were always so tragic. At the funeral, Su Meng accused her uncle of being the murderer of her parents. However, there was no evidence. Su Meng, who was depressed and in pain, ran to the bar to drink. She thought about how her beloved parents had left her and she was an orphan. However, she couldn't take revenge. Su Meng drank more and more. In the end, she was spotted by a young man in the bar. Su Meng grew up in a rich family. She knew this man's intention. However, her body was weak and she was brought to a hotel by the young man. Su Meng took the opportunity to escape into a room. This room was Nanjujuan's room. Please don't ask why the male lead was in this room. Also, please don't ask why Nanjujun didn't stay in her own villa and insisted on staying in a hotel. Ning Shu didn't know either. Things were just so coincidental. After tearing at each other for a while, the two of them finally slept together. Lightning struck the earth, causing the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. When Nan Zhujun woke up the next morning, Xiao Yan saw that there was no one beside him. However, there was a note beside the bed with 1,000 yuan. It said that it was for him to spend the night. Xiao Yan was furious. He already had a physiological reaction in the morning. Looking at the money and the words on the note, Nan Zhujun almost shot out of anger. Then he swore to find that hateful woman, blah blah. Don't ask why a person with a hangover would wake up earlier than a normal person. Ning Shu could only say that perhaps Xiao Yan was too tired and used up too much energy. Speaking of which, Su Meng acted as if she was suffering from paranoia. She felt that her uncle was going to get rid of her, so she quickly bought a plane ticket and left the country. Then Xiao Yan, who was in the country, almost turned the ground upside down, but he still couldn't find that woman. Su Meng, who was overseas, found out that she was pregnant. Thinking that she had no relatives, and that this child was a gift from God, Su Meng decided to give birth to it. Then, she was very lucky and gave birth to a pair of twins. These two children were very cute, had high IQ, and could earn money. They were so sensible and well-behaved that they didn't seem like children. As the eldest brother, not only did he have to take care of his younger sister, he also had to take care of his adorable mother sometimes. Xiao Yan couldn't find Su Meng, so he followed his parents' advice and married Su Ran, who was Su Meng's cousin. 7 years later, Su Meng returned to China and returned to her hometown with the two children. Under the influence of Su Debao, Xiao Yan and Su Meng met. Xiao Yan recognized this woman at a glance, and when he saw the two children beside her, his heart beat even more fiercely. Su Meng, however, knew that this man had become her cousin-in-law, and she was even more disdainful of Xiao Yan. Even if she was a single mother, there were many pursuers around her, and there were even men waiting silently by her side. When the original owner learned that her husband had such a big illegitimate child with her cousin, she felt bad. She and Xiao Yan had been married for almost 5 years, but they still didn't have any children. The relationship between the older generation was not good, and the relationship between Su Meng and Su Ran was even worse. Now, Su Meng was obviously going to steal her husband, especially when Su Meng had an expression of, "I don't like your husband, take care of your husband," which made Su Ran hate her even more. Since she looked down on him, why did she always flirt with him? Xiao Yan, on the other hand, was deeply in love with Su Meng, and they had a pair of lovely children. This pair of children made the whole Xiao family obedient, especially the two elders of the Xiao family. The original owner, Su Ran, had been married for so many years without children, so she treated the two children very well. Not long ago, Su Ran found out that she was 2 months pregnant, which almost made Su Ran cry with joy. But not long after, she was pushed down the stairs by Debao, who was 6 years old. Su Ran was lying in a pool of blood. She heard Debao naughtily say that he didn't do it on purpose. This ant wanted to push him, and he let her go, and then the ant fell down the stairs. Xiao Yan actually said that this was what he should do, and that his son was very smart. The pain in her body couldn't be compared to the pain in her heart. How is this a cute baby? This was simply a naughty child with the naivety and cruelty of a child. How could such a smart Debao not understand the consequences? He could make money, had a high IQ, and was also a top hacker. The male lead should be Debao, who was simply a cheat. After Ning Shu accepted the plot, he felt that his whole person was not very good. What kind of world was this? The 3 views of the world were so wrong. Out of wedlock, a mistress got married, and in the end, they still lived happily together. The 3 views of the world were all shocked. The original owner's wishes were, 1. Protect the Su family and not let the Xiao family annex the Su family. 2. She would rather die than divorce, so that Su Meng would be an illegitimate mistress for the rest of her life, and let the 2 vicious children be lowly illegitimate children forever. Since everyone said that she was vicious, she would be vicious to the end. Her character was quite unyielding. She would go down this path to the end, which was completely the rhythm of the evil. It was not long after being pushed down the stairs by Debao and sent to the hospital. When Ning Shu just woke up, The person talking to the original owner's mother, Mrs. Su, was Xiao Yan. He was quite good-looking, but his attitude towards his wife was not so good. Ning Shu was more fortunate that she didn't have to sleep with Xiao Yan now. Ning Shu reckoned that Xiao Yan's face would be full of disgust. In fact, even if he wanted to get lost, Xiao Yan still had to stay chaste for Su Meng. If he wanted to sleep with someone, he had to sleep with the female lead, Su Meng. This time, Su Meng was very unhappy that Su Ran was pregnant. 2 months pregnant meant that after she came back, Xiao Yan still slept with the vicious Su Ran, which made Su Meng very disgusted. Because of this, in the ward just now, Xiao Yan was extremely disgusted with Su Ran. He almost directly said that she deserved it. It seemed that he didn't expect that Su Ran was also pregnant with his child. It was so cold. Love was originally beautiful, but based on the premise of destroying others, this kind of love was really disgusting. Chapter 71. Ning Shu began her miserable confinement. She couldn't take a shower or wash her hair. Mrs. Su didn't even want Ning Shu to brush her teeth, but Ning Shu couldn't stand it. No one from the Xiao family came to visit her while she was in the hospital. She was the young mistress of the Xiao family, wasn't she? But she felt like the original Su Ran was invisible. She didn't even have a sense of existence. If they didn't divorce, wouldn't it be better for them to live their own lives? What was the point? If this went on, Xiao Yan would definitely turn her into a deceased wife and marry Su Meng into the family. Thinking of the original Su Ran's fate, she could only say that she didn't seek death. She died miserably when she fought with the male and female lead. Mrs. Su was very unhappy that the Xiao family neglected her daughter. She took care of her daughter in the hospital without any clothes on. Ning Shu was a little touched. She should have seen how many people cared about her. Why did she have to spend her energy on a man who didn't want her? Mrs. Su looked at her daughter with a worried expression. She was careful in everything she did because she was afraid of touching her daughter's pain. Ning Shu didn't like the hospital at all. When she was alive, she spent 365 days a year in the hospital, so she felt disgusted staying in the hospital now. Ning Shu's confinement was almost over, but Xiao Yan didn't even come to visit her. He was so cold. She was his wife, wasn't he? It was as if he couldn't express his love for the female lead without being cruel to another woman. What an idiot. Ning Shu thought she would have a more leisurely confinement. When she was about to leave the hospital, she saw the female lead, Su Meng, come to visit her. Su Meng came to visit her. Ning Shu lay on the bed and looked at Su Meng. Su Meng was petite, and her soft hair was slightly curly. Coupled with her small, round face, she didn't look like a mother of a 6-year-old child at all. She was very delicate. Ning Shu wiped the feces from the corner of her eyes and rubbed it on Su Meng, who was standing beside the bed. Su Meng suddenly felt like she was struck by lightning. Her mouth twitched, and she quickly put the bouquet on the bed, away from Ning Shu. Su Meng didn't say anything, and neither did Ning Shu. Mrs. Su looked at Su Meng with a sharp gaze, her eyes filled with undisguised disgust. It was obvious that she hated this niece of hers to the core. Su Meng ignored Mrs. Su's gaze. Su Meng clearly knew that although they were relatives, they were also enemies. Her parents had lost their lives because of her uncle's family. Her parents had never thought of competing with her uncle for anything, so why would they not let them off? Ning Shu lay on the bed and watched Su Meng's expression change. One moment it was resentful, the next moment it was melancholy, and the next moment it was hatred. In short, her expression was too complicated to describe. Ning Shu asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Su Meng looked at the woman lying on the bed with a complicated expression and said, "Dabao told me about you falling from downstairs. He wasn't careful." Ning Shu was speechless. Was she here to poke at her heart? Ning Shu pursed his lips and looked at Su Meng. Su Meng continued, "I'm very sorry for what happened. This is retribution." Retribution? Ning Shu sneered, "Why don't you tell me what kind of retribution it is? I'm afraid the retribution will be even greater for strangling a child who hasn't even seen the world. Everyone knows exactly what is going on. Now, you're running over to me to talk about retribution. This consort. Bah, what retribution?" Su Meng was frightened by Ning Shu's expression. She only felt that the person in front of her was incomparably fierce. Su Meng's heart surged with anger. She said coldly, "If you don't want anyone to know, don't do it in the first place. What kind of heinous things did your family do? Is that why your child didn't want you to be his mother and left you like this? Su Meng, you're not a good person either. What right do you have to talk about my daughter like that? Shameless bitch, you climbed into a man's bed and gave birth to his child. If I were you, I would have jumped off a building long ago. Don't you feel shame for being so thick-skinned?" Mrs. Su bombarded Su Meng indiscriminately. Su Meng took a few steps back after being scolded by Mrs. Su. She raised her chin and said, "You people will get retribution one day." Ning Shu laughed and said to Su Meng, "What retribution will I get? You stole someone else's husband, destroyed someone else's family, and are a mistress that everyone hates. Your child is an illegitimate child and can't be registered. You should be the one getting retribution." Ning Shu realized that Su Meng's words and actions were quite naive. Of course, the female lead had the right to be naive and muddle-headed. Men loved her. How muddle-headed was Su Meng? Here's an example. President Xiao Yan, "Woman, you stepped on my foot." Su Meng, sorry, President Xiao Yan, "Woman, you stepped on my left foot." She didn't know anything and decided the truth based on her own subjective feelings. No one else could be so willful other than the female lead. As for the death of Su Meng's parents, Ning Shu knew from the plot that the father of this body wanted to kill them, but they died in advance. Even the father of this body was shocked when he heard the news. He just wanted to kill them, but they died in the end. They were rushing to their deaths. Then, the female lead believed that her uncle's family killed her parents, and they had the motive and intention to do so. Ning Shu sighed. He felt that the death of the female lead's parents was all for Su Meng's beauty. Did she meet the one she was destined to meet? Canon Fodder was so miserable. When Su Meng heard Ning Shu accuse her of being a mistress, she was so angry that tears welled up in her almond-shaped eyes. She said angrily, "I'm not a mistress. I don't like your husband. You're the husband who came to me. I, Su Meng, don't want a man who has been used by others." Shrugging her shoulders, Ning Shu looked at Xiao Yan, who was standing at the door with an unsightly expression. Taking pleasure in Xiao Yan's misfortune, Ning Shu said to Xiao Yan, "Your true love said that you're a man that I've used before, and she doesn't want you." Su Meng turned and saw the tall and handsome Xiao Yan. Seeing his cold expression, Su Meng's heart trembled. She turned and pointed at Ning Shu and said angrily, "You're deliberately tricking me." Ning Shu said that she didn't need to trick him. Xiao Yan looked heartbroken and walked to Su Meng. Su Meng snorted and turned to leave the room, but Xiao Yan grabbed her arm. Su Meng struggled and shouted, "Go and grab your wife's hand." "Why are you grabbing me? Let me tell you, I will never fall in love with you. Let me tell you, Su Meng, you're mine in this life." Xiao Yan grabbed Su Meng and pressed her body tightly against him. Xiao Yan held Su Meng's waist with one hand and his handsome face was serious. "I said you're my only wife." Chapter 72. Ning Shu's mouth twitched as he watched Xiao Yan and Su Meng tugging at each other, almost hugging each other. Although Su Meng was struggling, their bodies inexplicably got closer and closer. How was this a quarrel? This was fucking flirting, wasn't it? "Let go of me, let go of me." Su Meng pounded on Xiao Yan's chest and shouted coquettishly, "Don't pester me anymore. You already have a wife, I don't want to be a mistress." Xiao Yan held Su Meng's waist tightly and said with a seductive smile, "I want to pester you. You are my woman, don't even think about leaving me in this lifetime. You have already given birth to 2 children for me, you are the mother of my children." No. Su Meng pouted and gently pounded on Xiao Yan's chest with her little fist. Xiao Yan raised the corner of his mouth and smiled wickedly. "If I say you are, then you are." The two showed off their affection as if there was no one else around, completely disregarding whether others could take it or not. Ning Shu really couldn't help but vomit. The two people who were hugging each other immediately glared at Ning Shu. Ning Shu quickly waved his hand. "Sorry, I really couldn't help it. I have never seen such a disgusting thing and couldn't help it. Sorry, you can continue. Find another place to continue." Just don't fucking do it in front of her. Ning Shu felt that he should wash his eyes. The scene in front of him really broke his moral integrity and destroyed his 3 views. Showing off their affection in front of his wife and a mistress was simply stabbing a knife into his heart. Su Meng pushed Xiao Yan away and pointed at Xiao Yan with her white finger. She was angry but seemed to be acting coquettishly. I'm warning you, don't come near me and don't touch me. I'm not interested in other women's husbands, humph. Ning Shu, help. Ning Shu clutched her chest and almost vomited blood. She didn't know how to describe the female lead, Su Meng. Silly and sweet? Innocent and delicate? Not scheming? That didn't seem to be the case. To be more precise, she was willful and pretentious. Her mouth said no, but her body was very honest. If she really had no interest in Xiao Yan, she could do what she did 7 years ago. She could hide so that Xiao Yan couldn't find her, or she could find a suitor to be the child's father. Anyway, Su Meng had plenty of suitors around her. Su Meng made a speech that seemed very impassioned, then turned around and left. Xiao Yan chased after her helplessly and angrily. Ning Shu felt the malice of the universe. She would rather kill people like in the previous world than face this kind of male and female lead. Ning Shu reflexively touched her waist, but she didn't find the whip. Could she just whip the 2 of them to death? Anyway, the original owner's wish was not to get divorced. Being a widow wasn't a bad idea. With a husband like Xiao Yan, she might as well be a widow. Ning Shu's heart was filled with killing intent. She really fell in love with this simple and violent way of solving problems. Su Ran, let me tell you, I will never fall in love with you. The one I love is Su Meng. Xiao Yan, who went to chase Su Meng, ran back to the ward and shouted at Ning Shu. Ning Shu was dumbfounded. Seeing this idiot shouting at her for no reason, Ning Shu blinked and tilted her head to look at Xiao Yan. Crazy. I didn't do anything. If you love Su Meng, then love Su Meng. Why the hell are you shouting in front of me? Ning Shu's heart was filled with curses. Su Ran, you better know your place. Don't provoke Su Meng. If you don't, I will make you suffer. Xiao Yan's face was cold, and his eyes were filled with extreme disgust. There was a kind of viciousness that couldn't wait to get rid of her, but he seemed to be worried about something. Ning Shu lifted the quilt and walked in front of Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu coldly and sneered, Su Ran, give up. I will never fall in love with you, you vicious and hypocritical woman. Walking in front of Xiao Yan, Ning Shu found that Xiao Yan was really tall. He had a perfect inverted triangle figure with wide shoulders and a narrow waist. He wore a suit, which matched his handsome and perfectly sculpted face. He was handsome, rich, and had the powerful ability to do it 7 times a night. All the good things in the world were concentrated on him. He had all the requirements of a woman and a pervert. Fuck, Ning Shu had never seen such a pervert. He was obviously the one who cheated, but he was so righteous. Ning Shu didn't see any sense of responsibility for his family or his wife. He didn't have any sense of responsibility as a man. Instead, he treated his wife as the biggest obstacle in his love life. In the end, they could live happily together without any grudges. We don't understand the protagonist's world. Ning Shu sneered and raised her knee to Xiao Yan's crotch. Ning Shu used all her strength. She really couldn't stand Xiao Yan's chatter in front of her. Xiao Yan didn't expect that Ning Shu would hit his private part without saying anything. He immediately cried out in pain, and his handsome face was distorted. He held the wall with one hand and covered his crotch with the other. His legs were clamped, and he bent over in extreme pain. Xiao Yan stared at Ning Shu with red eyes, looking shocked and painful. Obviously, he didn't expect that the woman who usually adored him would suddenly hit him. It was really painful. Ning Shu sneered and patted Xiao Yan's shoulder, who was bending over and covering his crotch. Do you feel very painful? Do you feel like your heart is breaking? The pain I felt when I lost my child was 1,000 times more painful than this. Su Ran? Xiao Yan's voice almost came out from between his teeth, which looked very gloomy and horrible. His eyes were red, and he looked like he was going to swallow Ning Shu alive. He reached out his hand and grabbed Ning Shu's wrist tightly. He was so strong that he wanted to break Ning Shu's wrist. Ning Shu's expression didn't change at all. She endured the pain in her hand and used all her strength to give Xiao Yan a big slap on the face. With a bang, Xiao Yan's head was knocked askew. Ning Shu said lightly, "Let go." Xiao Yan was almost stunned by Ning Shu's slap in the face. Then, his heart was filled with extreme anger and humiliation. He, Xiao Yan, had never been slapped in his life, let alone in such a way. Xiao Yan breathed heavily and turned his head to look at Ning Shu viciously. His eyes were red and filled with the desire to destroy the world, as if he was about to devour someone. Facing Xiao Yan's eyes, Ning Shu's expression didn't change. His sister even dared to kill people. How could this kind of eyes scare her? "Let go," Ning Shu said lightly. Xiao Yan pulled Ning Shu's hand hard, almost crushing Ning Shu's wrist. "Let go." Slap. A big slap in the face. "Let go." Slap. Another big slap in the face. "I said let go." Slap slap. The big slaps continued. Chapter 73. Although Xiao Yan was a man, his skin was very tender and smooth. Ning Shu slapped his face again and felt that it was slippery. With one hand being grabbed by Xiao Yan, Ning Shu could only focus on one side of Xiao Yan's face. After a while, half of Xiao Yan's face was swollen and bruised, forming a sharp contrast with the handsome face on the other side. Xiao Yan slowly turned his head to look at Ning Shu, a storm brewing in his eyes. He looked at Ning Shu maliciously. "You're very good, hiss." Xiao Yan originally wanted to scare Ning Shu, but as soon as he spoke, he pulled the wound on his face and tears came down from the pain. Xiao Yan was going crazy. Seeing that Ning Shu was about to raise his hand to hit him again, he stopped covering his crotch and grabbed Ning Shu's raised hand. He squeezed Ning Shu's hands tightly and shouted, "You bitch!" Ning Shu sneered. He didn't have hands but feet. Ning Shu quickly raised his foot and kicked Xiao Yan's crotch. Ning Shu's kick made Xiao Yan's eyes almost pop out of their sockets. He fell to the ground and covered his crotch, howling. Blue veins popped out on his forehead and cold sweat dripped down. Ning Shu moved his wrist, which was pinched by Xiao Yan, and turned blue. Ning Shu coldly looked at Xiao Yan, who was rolling on the ground. What a useless piece of trash. In the last world, Ning Shu had always wanted to kick Helian Ying to make her unable to have children, but he didn't get what he wanted. They were both men, but Xiao Yan was really a weakling. "Ran-air, are you okay?" Mrs. Su watched everything that happened just now. Seeing her daughter like this, she intuitively felt that her daughter had been driven crazy by Su Ran and Xiao Yan, this pair of bitches. Ning Shu shook his head. "I'm fine." Then he walked to the bedside and pressed a button to call the doctor. "Nurse, there's a patient with broken testicles. Come and save him." Ning Shu said lightly. Xiao Yan, who was in incomparable pain, heard Ning Shu's words. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Ning Shu. His hatred was monstrous, as if he was about to devour someone. Coupled with his pig-like face, how could he not look funny? Not enough. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows and asked Xiao Yan. Ning Shu raised his foot. "I can give you another kick?" "Su Ran, you'll regret messing with me." Xiao Yan's words were intermittent, and he was in so much pain that he couldn't stop breathing. Then, he stood up with the help of the wall and was about to walk away. Xiao Yan would never do it in such a private place. Otherwise, the headlines tomorrow would be that the president of Zhao's group was dying and that he had to go to the andrology department. Xiao Yan couldn't afford to lose face. Every step Xiao Yan took made his body tremble and sweat profusely. The muscles on his face trembled, which pulled the swollen wound on his face and made it even more painful. Su Ran. When Xiao Yan walked out of the ward, he turned to Ning Shu and called Su Ran's name through gritted teeth. It was very gloomy. Ning Shu smacked his lips. "Look at you. I thought you fell in love with me." Xiao Yan coughed violently. "Su Ran, you're shameless." Ning Shu shrugged and looked indifferent. "Who in the world is more shameless than you?" "Xiao Yan, you are the most shameless person in the world." The nurse and doctor called by Ning Shu pushed the bed over. Seeing Xiao Yan, who was standing at the door with his legs clamped, they ignored Xiao Yan's struggle and opposition and pressed him on the bed, saying that they were going to push him to the operating room. Ning Shu thought viciously. He didn't know if they would cut off that part. If she couldn't have sex with Xiao Yan, would Su Meng still want it? Ning Shu felt some regret in her heart. If she could practice peerless martial arts in this world, her strength would be much greater. She could kick Xiao Yan until he was crippled. If she slapped him, Xiao Yan would definitely have a concussion. After coming to this world, Ning Shu tried to practice the martial arts of the last world when he felt better, but he didn't succeed. Every world had its own rules. Imagine a world with endless traffic. It was unreasonable for a person to be able to fly over roofs and vault over walls. Moreover, the spiritual energy in this world couldn't be used for practice. Ranair. Mrs. Su looked at Ning Shu worriedly. Won't Xiao Yan hate you more if you do this? Are you pushing Xiao Yan to that little bitch Su Meng? It's okay, Mom. I know what to do. Ning Shu sneered in his heart. She was not in love with Xiao Yan. Besides, the original host didn't ask her to get Xiao Yan back. Why should she swallow the insult? Otherwise, Xiao Yan and Su Meng would come to her every day to disgust her. Mrs. Su saw that Ning Shu was calm and didn't have the pain and madness of losing the children. She said, "You have to save face. If you treat Xiao Yan like this, your parents-in-law will have a problem with you." Her existence was a mistake. No matter what she did, Xiao Yan's parents would have a problem with it. Especially now that they had 2 golden grandchildren. The original host Su Ran was a thorn in their side. However, for the sake of the Su family, they didn't divorce her. But the title of the young madam of the Xiao family existed in name only. You'll be discharged tomorrow. Are you going back to the Su family or the Xiao family? Mrs. Su asked Ning Shu. After thinking for a while, she said, now that little bitch Su Meng has a strong momentum because she gave birth to 2 children for Xiao Yan. Let's go home first. There will always be a chance to deal with that little bitch. Now Xiao Yan is hot to that little bitch. When Xiao Yan is tired of her, it will be our chance. Ning Shu shook her head and said, I'm the young madam of the Xiao family. Of course I'll go back to the Xiao family. After that, I'll go back to the Su family. I have something to discuss with my father. If the plot was right, the Su family and the Mu family were cooperating, but the Su family was directly hollowed out on a project. This was a trap set by Xiao Yan. He dealt with the Su family because of Su Ran, the annoying existence, and also to avenge Su Meng's parents. The woman he loved was wronged. Of course, he would seek justice. In addition to what she had just done to Xiao Yan, now Xiao Yan wanted to eat her flesh and drink her blood. Just now she had plucked the tiger's whiskers. She had to think about her own life. She might as well kill Xiao Yan. Tut, this was not good. It was too violent. Ning Shu thought that she was a gentle person. How could she let Xiao Yan die so easily? Besides, murder was illegal. This was not the ancient time where human life was worthless. The original owner of the body did not want to be a murderer. Ning Shu thought about it in her heart. If Xiao Yan didn't have his current status, he wouldn't have the capital to be proud of, and he wouldn't have the courage to throw away money like that. How would he be able to flirt with Su Meng, be lovey-dovey, be lovey-dovey? All romance was built on money. In order to survive, ordinary people always wanted to earn money to support themselves. How could they have the time and money to be romantic? Without the halo, Xiao Yan was down and out. He had to run for 3 meals a day. Would Su Meng still be with him? Maybe. After all, it was true love. So she decided to protect the Su family from being annexed by the Xiao family. At the same time, if possible, it would be best to destroy the Xiao family. Chapter 74. The next day, Ning Shu was discharged from the hospital and returned to Zhao's house with a bag of things. Zhao's house was very big, with a villa garden, statues and fountains. It looked like a top-rich family. When Ning Shu returned to Zhao's house, no one came to receive her. She was completely treated as an invisible person. This kind of embarrassment was unbearable for most people. But Ning Shu calmly walked into the living room. Before she saw anyone, she heard the laughter in the hall. There were adults' hearty voices mixed with children's innocent laughter. Ning Shu glanced around and saw the spacious living room. The floor was full of various toys. Xiao Yan's parents were sitting on the sofa and playing with the 2 children. Ning Shu carefully looked at the 2 babies. One of them was Su de Bao, who looked like a little adult. He was very cute, with white and tender skin, a pair of purple grape-like eyes, and slightly curly hair. He was wearing suspenders and a small red bow tie on his shirt. He looked very serious, which made people's hearts melt. One of them was Su Xiaobao, who was dressing the dolls. He had soft and slightly curly hair like Su Meng and looked extremely sweet. Wearing a tutu skirt, he looked like a little princess who was favored by the heavens. The two children were really cute. However, if it wasn't for Su Debao's actions, Ning Shu would have really praised the two children's appearance that defied the heavens. As soon as Ning Shu came in, the happy atmosphere froze, as if a cold current swept by. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ning Shu, especially Su Debao, who tilted his head and looked at Ning Shu. His eyes flashed with a sly and mischievous light, but it made Ning Shu's back hair stand up. How is this a child's eyes? Su Debao is really a dangerous existence. He has a smart brain, but he doesn't have a sense of right and wrong. He does things according to his mood. For example, the original Su Ran was pregnant. Su Debao immediately knew that the child in the original Su Ran's belly would threaten the relationship between his father and his mother, and also threaten the position of him and his sister, so he pushed her downstairs. She was really vicious. She had the naivety and cruelty of a child. Ning Shu's impression of Su Meng became even worse. Since she had given birth to a child, she should educate the child and set up a correct worldview for the child. However, Su Meng was busy getting into trouble and being lovable in a daze. Sometimes, Su Debao, who was still a child, had to deal with the aftermath. The money that Su Debao earned was enough for Su Meng to live comfortably. He was like a mature child, but Su Debao felt that he could protect his mother and was very happy with his sister. It was a completely deformed mother-son relationship. Ning Shu walked in as if there was no one around. Madame Xiao stood up. Ning Shu said, "You're back?" Ning Shu nodded and went upstairs. Seeing that Ning Shu ignored them like this, Master Xiao and Madame Zhao's face turned ugly. They turned to look at the back of Ning Shu going upstairs. Master Xiao frowned, dissatisfaction flashed across his face. If Madame Xiao didn't have a child in front of her, she would have already scolded Ning Shu. What does it mean to not divorce even if you die? Madame Xiao wasn't so satisfied with Su Meng, but for the sake of a pair of children, she accepted Su Meng. However, Su Ran also didn't have good eyesight. She shouldn't have taken the initiative to divorce. Su Debao's eyes turned and his face immediately smiled. He threw himself into Master Zhao's arms and said, "Grandpa, don't be angry. Debao doesn't want Grandpa to be angry. Mommy said that anger is bad for people's health." Yes, Xiaobao also doesn't want Grandpa to be angry. Su Xiaobao put down the doll and said to Master Xiao. Master Xiao suddenly smiled and touched Su Debao's head. Okay, Grandpa won't be angry. Grandpa doesn't like to be angry. Humph, you only care about whether your grandpa is angry or not. Grandma is also angry. Madame Xiao said this, but her face showed a sincere and kind smile. Su Xiaobao immediately touched Madame Zhao's face with his small hand and said with a serious face, "Grandma, don't be angry. Anger will make you old." Xiaobao hopes that Grandma will always be so beautiful and young. Madame Xiao felt that her heart was about to melt. This was simply the two treasures that God gave to the Xiao family. Ning Shu didn't care about how lovey-dovey the grandfather and grandson were. When he returned to the bedroom, he put away the jewelry on the dressing table and some particularly valuable things. Many of the things were the dowry of the original owner and were very valuable. After the original owner Su Ran was defeated in the Su family, she was kicked out of the house by Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan gave a lot of the original owner's things to Su Meng. He also said that he got back all the things that Su Meng lost. These things should have been Su Meng's. Ning Shu felt like she was drunk. She was so drunk that she couldn't take it. Ning Shu put the jewelry and some precious shares in the bag and then prepared to go to the bank to open a safe. These things were to be left for the cruel and unscrupulous people. Not to mention that the original owner didn't agree, even Ning Shu wanted to vomit. Even Ning Shu, an outsider, couldn't help but feel angry. There was actually such a shameless person in the world. He was simply a strange space carrier. Ning Shu went downstairs with a bag of things. The happy atmosphere that Su Debao and Su Xiaobao tried to create was frozen by Ning Shu. Ning Shu suddenly felt that he had become the king of awkward silence. When he walked to the door, Ning Shu suddenly turned back and said to the people in the living room, "I will be back for lunch. Remember to leave some food for me. I want to eat abalone at noon. Tell the kitchen to leave some for me. It must be left. I had a miscarriage and need to nourish my body." As Ning Shu spoke, his eyes stopped on Su Debao. Su Debao looked at Ning Shu innocently with his head tilted. "Auntie, why are you looking at me? I am not an abalone." Ning Shu looked at Su Debao seriously and said, "You shouldn't call me auntie. You should call me auntie. In ancient times, your mother was a concubine. I am your mother." Su Debao's face suddenly became gloomy. A pair of eyes looked at Ning Shu fiercely. He secretly made a throat-slitting gesture to Ning Shu, which really made people feel cold. Ning Shu's expression didn't change. In the end, he was still a child. He couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. "Remember to call me auntie in the future. Call your mother little mom." Su Debao could hold it in, but Su Xiaobao suddenly burst into tears. "My mother is not my stepmother. No, you bad woman." Seeing their baby crying, the two elders of the Xiao family suddenly panicked and coaxed the crying child. Su ran, "Why are you saying this to a child? What are you saying?" Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu. "Oh baby, don't cry. Grandma's heart hurts." Ning Shu curled her lips. "Is there any justice? She was just telling the truth. What's wrong with her? Why is her heart so fragile?" She allowed Su Meng to do it and didn't let others say it. Chapter 75. Ning Shu was too lazy to look at the grandparent and grandchild affectionate scene. She said to the servant at home, "Remember to get me abalone." Ning Shu's words made the four of them stare at her, especially Su Debao, who looked at Ning Shu with a particularly gloomy expression. Su Xiaobao was coaxing his sister while crying loudly. He looked at Ning Shu through the gaps between his fingers. As long as Ning Shu's eyes met his, he would immediately burst into tears. It was as if he was scared to tears by Ning Shu. He cried pitifully. "Now that the child is crying like this, you still say that it's abalone. Su Ran, have you never eaten abalone in your 8 lifetimes?" Mrs. Xiao coaxed Su Xiaobao while glaring at Ning Shu. "Ning Shu, she really hasn't eaten abalone in her 8 lifetimes. Sure enough, her existence was a mistake. No matter what she did, it was a mistake." Ning Shu turned around and left. She was not going to beg the Xiao family. Even a child as young as her was giving her attitude and scheming behind her back. It must have been hard for the naive Su Meng to give birth to such a scheming child. Could it be that the Xiao family's genes were like this? Toward Ning Shu's attitude, it could be said that the Xiao family's couple was furious. A daughter-in-law was so arrogant. She actually had such an attitude toward the elderly. Look at what kind of daughter-in-law she married. Marry a virtuous wife. How could such a woman be the future matriarch of the Xiao family? Ning Shu didn't care about what others thought. First, she went to the bank to open a safe and locked everything. After everything was done, Ning Shu returned to the Su family to see the father of this body. Ning Shu couldn't believe that a person who had been in the business world for half his life would fall into the hands of Xiao Yan, who was younger than him. The protagonist's aura didn't need to be explained. When the supporting characters met the protagonist, their IQ would plummet to below the normal level. Su Ran's father was an elegant middle-aged man with a calm temperament. He looked like a mature and elegant businessman. When he saw Ning Shu, he looked at Ning Shu from head to toe and said, "You've just been discharged from the hospital. Don't run around." Ning Shu smiled and said, "Dad, I'm fine now." Mr. Su frowned when he saw the smile on Ning Shu's face. "How can you still smile in this situation? You can't even protect your own child, falling into the hands of a 6-year-old child. Don't you think it's embarrassing? Are you still my daughter?" Ning Shu secretly curled his lips. "Aren't you going to fall into Xiao Yan's hands in the future?" Not a single strand of hair was left in the Su family. They were all plundered by Xiao Yan. "Father, I was wrong. What else could I have done? Those 2 children have subdued the entire Xiao family. Now, I don't even have a place to stand in the Xiao family. Ning Shu said pitifully. What a good-for-nothing. You can't even compare with a child. Su Bo frowned tightly. If this goes on, I'm afraid that the business between the Su family and the Xiao family will collapse. Ning Shu looked at Su Bo seriously. Let's not cooperate with the Xiao family. Now Su Meng and Xiao Yan are in love, and Xiao Yan said that he would avenge Su Meng and her parents. Su Meng always thought that it was you who killed her parents. We should look for a new breakthrough. Ning Shu's face was gloomy, as if he had been betrayed by a man. Su Bo's face changed. He was skeptical about the news and said, business is business. Xiao Yan won't destroy the business of two families for a woman. Ning Shu responded to Su Bo's words with a smile. For Su Meng, Xiao Yan would do anything. Otherwise, how could he express his love for Su Meng and fulfill the two children's wish to be together as a family and their parents love each other? Since you're married, you should take care of your husband and children. Don't get involved in the business. Su Bo said, take good care of yourself and give birth to an heir for the Xiao family. As for Su Meng's two children, they are illegitimate children. They can't shake your position. Ning Shu's heart sank. She didn't expect Su Bo to be so stubborn and not believe what she said at all. Could it be that the Su family really couldn't escape the fate of being annexed? Ning Shu thought for a moment and felt that she was too impatient. The business between the Xiao family and the Su family had always been good and nothing had gone wrong. She rashly said that the Xiao family was going to deal with the Su family. Of course, Su Bo didn't believe her. Su Bo probably thought that she was crazy because of the loss of her children and Su Meng, her love rival, so she said such a harmful idea. Ning Shu felt that it was necessary to find evidence to make Su Bo believe her, but she couldn't pin all her hopes on the Su family. She finally understood why the Su family was defeated in an instant. It was because Su Bo trusted the Xiao family too much and didn't expect that Xiao Yan would destroy the Su family in one fell swoop. Ran Air, do you want to have lunch at home? Madame Su asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu shook her head. She had achieved her goal today. I'm not eating at home. Ning Shu said to Su Bo seriously, Father, soon, the Xiao family will develop a piece of land. It's said that it's planned by the Zheng family. When the time comes, the Su family will definitely be involved. This case is Xiao Yan's plan to deal with the He family. Maybe I'm overthinking, but Father, please be careful. Ning Shu reminded Su Bo that if the Su family's path didn't work, there were other paths to take. After spending a short time with Su Bo, Ning Shu found that Su Bo was actually a person who looked down on women. Moreover, his daughter was married. Strictly speaking, she wasn't a member of the Su family. Su Bo was probably still angry that he suddenly came back to sow discord between the two families. Ning Shu thought about it and felt that it was quite boring. He came back with good intentions, but in the end, Su Bo didn't appreciate it at all. When Ning Shu was about to leave, the brother of the original Su Ran came back. Su Lan was currently studying in university. When she saw Ning Shu call her sister, her gaze moved to Ning Shu's stomach. Ning Shu said, Sister, don't be too sad. It's all because the child is immature. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes. How could he say that? Ning Shu looked at Su Lan. Su Lan looked like Su Bo. She was wearing a white shirt and looked gentle. She had a noble aura around her. She was the school hunk. Who told you that Su Debao was careless? Ning Shu frowned and looked at Su Lan. Su Lan's face showed a disapproving expression. Cousin Su Meng has already explained to me that the child was careless. Sister, you're very sad that you lost your child, but you can't push all the blame to an immature child. These words were directly saying that even if you want to frame someone, don't frame a child. Ning Shu looked up to the sky and roared in his heart. Another man kneeling under the halo of Mary Su. Under the halo of Mary Su, all men kneel or become cannon fodder. Ning Shu felt his heart twitching. A feeling of sadness filled his heart. His own brother didn't believe him. Instead, he spoke up for Su Meng. The original Su Meng was angry and helpless facing such a brother. She hated Su Meng even more. However, Ning Shu only had one feeling. She wanted to slap this kid. Chapter 76. Ning Shu didn't expect the original owner's younger brother to be such a joker. Could this be the plot? A good person would appear in the enemy's camp? A good person in Su Meng's eyes? Ning Shu looked at Su Lan. She was a little fresh meat with a clean temperament, not as cool and arrogant as the male lead Xiao Yan. Tiske, so this is the future master of the Su family. Everything in the Su family will be inherited by Su Lan. Su Lan, apologize to your sister. Madame Su saw her daughter's unkind expression. She's your sister. How can you just listen to what Su Meng says? Madame Su loved her son dearly, but her daughter was also her own flesh and blood. Now that they quarreled because of Su Meng, Madame Su hated Su Meng even more. Su Lan frowned and straightened her neck. It's my sister's fault. Everyone is sad that we lost our child, but it's wrong of her to frame someone else. Ning Shu rolled his eyes and sneered in his heart. He walked in front of Su Lan. She wasn't as tall as Su Lan, but when she looked up at Su Lan's heart trembled. Her eyes were very cold, making Su Lan's heart flutter. Ning Shu frowned and looked at Su Lan. Were you there? Do you know how it happened? Before Su Lan could speak, Ning Shu's hand slapped Su Lan's face, causing her head to tilt to the side. Su Lan turned her head and looked at Ning Shu with resentment. Ning Shu's slap stunned everyone present. Su Bo's face turned ugly. His daughter hit his son, especially now that his daughter was married. Even if it was someone from another family, now that they came to meddle in his family's affairs, they even dared to enter his house and hit people. Su Bo coldly snorted, but it didn't make Ning Shu feel anything. People always save themselves, then the heavens save them. Ning Shu didn't have a good impression of Su Bo. This mission couldn't start with the Su family. An old-fashioned head of the family, a man who knelt under the halo of the female lead, Mary Su, deserved to be defeated. On the contrary, Su Ran and Madame Su were both women, so they could resist the halo of Mary Su to a certain extent. But in Su Lan's heart, her sister and mother were the bad guys. Madame Su looked at Ning Shu and said, "What are you doing? You're making your family sad and your enemies happy." Ning Shu smiled and ignored Su Lan's resentful eyes. He raised his hand and gave Su Lan a big slap. "You're already an adult, but you don't even have the ability to understand right and wrong. Without the Su family, you're just scum." He was just relying on the Su family's support, living a life that was above the common populace, just like a noble young master. Once Xiao Yan plundered the Su family, this noble young master would have to eat dirt. People like Su Lan couldn't even catch up with the heat of the feces. She looked like a little bottom, just looking like someone who was suppressed by others. Ning Shu looked down on brainless people like Su Lan the most. They were played around by women. He estimated that before Xiao Yan made a move, Su Lan would offer up the Su family with both hands to resolve the hatred of the previous generation and make up for the grievances of the female lead. The halo of Mary Su was really powerful. "Why did you hit me, Su Ran? People like you deserve to be loved by no one. You're cold and selfish. Your life is so poor, and your heart is so vicious." Half of Su Ran's face was swollen. Ning Shu thought, how did such a perverted person come into being? Ning Shu laughed and raised his hand to give Su Lan another slap. Ning Shu suddenly realized that he had fallen in love with the feeling of slapping one side of the face. The two sides of her face formed a sharp contrast. "I hit you to tell you that I don't need anyone, and I don't need your love. I hit you because you slandered me." Ning Shu blew on his hand. "What are you talking about? Don't forget that Su Meng is your cousin. Looking at you, I would think that you've fallen in love with her." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Su Lan anxiously shouted at Ning Shu with a pale face. "Your thoughts are so dirty. Who are you shouting at?" Ning Shu raised his hand and gave the emotional Su Lan another slap. Su Bo stood up and shouted, "Enough! What do you want?" Su Bo's gaze lingered between Ning Shu and Su Lan, and finally stopped on Ning Shu. "As a married woman, you should take good care of your in-laws and husband. Why are you throwing a tantrum so easily? What happened to the etiquette that you were taught since you were young? Dad?" Ning Shu didn't even want to call him dad now. He wasn't his dad to begin with. Ning Shu always thought that if you were good to him, he would be good to you. There was no such thing as love or hate for no reason in this world. Other than Madame Su, Ning Shu didn't like the father and son of the Su family. "Before I leave, I have something to say." Ning Shu pointed at Su Lan, whose half-face was swollen, with a look of disdain. If the heir of the Su family is like this, he might as well be swallowed up by the Shao family. Anyway, looking at him like this, Su Meng is his family. She doesn't even have feelings for me, her sister. As for you too, tsk. Su Ran, you vicious woman, are you crazy? Su Lan listened to Ning Shu's words. You said that I don't treat you as my sister, but now you're saying that I'm your younger brother. I don't treat you as my younger brother. Ning Shu lightly said, because in your heart, Su Meng is your sister. Naturally, I won't treat you as my younger brother. Ning Shu raised his hand. Su Lan shivered, thinking that Ning Shu was going to hit him again, and took 2 steps back. Look at you, you have the word spare tire written on your head. In the future, don't make a fuss in front of me. Otherwise, every time I see you, I'll hit you once. Ning Shu lightly said. Don't try to reason with this kind of brainless person. Otherwise, they will use their rich experience to defeat you. However, if you want to ask, why do these men obediently let Ning Shu hit them? That's because Ning Shu would retreat to a safe position every time she hit them. If the men were shameless, they could chase her around the house and hit her. Obviously, Su Lan was not such a person. He would not do such a thing. Moreover, Su Lan's reflexes were not sharp. After being hit by Ning Shu, he would only look at her with shocked and resentful eyes. Therefore, Ning Shu despised him even more. Ning Shu came out of the Su family and looked up at the sky. This time, he couldn't start with the Su family. He had to find a new entrance. The Su family was not the only one he could cooperate with. Moreover, Ning Shu's current intention was to make the Su family suffer. Ning Shu was not an emotionless machine. She also had her own emotions. During the mission, she would also have her own preferences. The host wanted to protect the Su family and prevent the Shao family from annexing it. If the Shao family was destroyed, they naturally couldn't annex the Su family. Originally, she wanted to join hands with the Su family, but the Su family obviously looked down on her as a married daughter. There was nothing to talk about with the Su family. Ning Shu probably would not come to the Su family in the future. Ning Shu decided to sell the dowry shares that the Su family gave her and the shares that the Shao family gave to her daughter-in-law. They were all exchanged for real money to complete the great task of destroying the Shao family. P.S. Some students think that the school doctor and Li Wen are the same person. The author kneels down to the student's imagination. One has a venomous tongue and nitpicky OCD, wanton and unrestrained love of freedom, and the other has a deep and expressionless face, seemingly emotional yet ruthless person. How could they be the same person? Chapter 77. Ning Shu decided to sell the ancient shares of the Shao family and the Su family. The money he got was the real deal. The president, whose face was swollen after being beaten by Ning Shu, went to see Su Meng with a swollen face. Su Meng didn't recognize Xiao Yan at all and screamed for help. Xiao Yan could only look at Su Meng with an evil look and said incoherently with a swollen face, "It's me, I'm Xiao Yan." Su Meng was stunned and asked anxiously, "What's wrong with you?" Xiao Yan wanted to smile evilly, but the wound on his face was pulled and he grimaced in pain. After a long time, he said, "Are you concerned about me?" Su Meng snorted and turned her head away from Xiao Yan. "I have nothing to do with you. Why should I care about you? I don't want to see you. Go away." Xiao Yan smiled. "I know you care about me. Why can't you admit it? You have your wife to care about. It's not my turn to care about you." Su Meng curled her lips and pouted, which made Xiao Yan swallow a mouthful of saliva. "Don't mention that bitch Su ran to me. My face is all because of that bitch." Xiao Yan gnashed his teeth and said in a gloomy and resentful voice. Su Meng covered her mouth in surprise and stared at Xiao Yan with her almond-shaped eyes. Xiao Yan was a little distracted by Su Meng's look. "Although I hate Su Ran very much, I also know that Su Ran loves you very much. How could she hit you? She is too cruel. How could she hit you like this?" Su Meng said as she reached out her hand and gently touched Xiao Yan's face. Xiao Yan's eyes lit up. Previously, Su Meng had been very angry about Su Ran's pregnancy. Ever since that bitch Su Ran started her confinement period, she had ignored him. Now that she took the initiative to show concern for him, Xiao Yan immediately grabbed Su Meng's hand and hissed, "My face hurts." Su Meng opened her eyes wide and looked at Xiao Yan with watery eyes. "Did I hurt you? I'll go find some medicine for you." Xiao Yan grabbed Su Meng, who was about to go look for the medicine, and pulled her into his arms. He looked at Su Meng with sparkling eyes and said softly, "You are my medicine. When I see you, I don't feel pain anymore." As he spoke, he kissed Su Meng. At first, Su Meng struggled a little. Her eyes widened in shock, and then she closed her eyes. Xiao Yan pressed Su Meng down on the sofa and rubbed her body. Su Meng's face turned pink as she moaned, "Don't. This sound made Xiao Yan incomparably excited. His lower body was in high spirits, but it also made Xiao Yan hiss in pain. His lower body felt like it was being torn apart, making Xiao Yan feel as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over him. Su Ran, this despicable woman. He had already waited for the doctor to confirm that he was fine before coming to look for Su Meng. After being kicked by Su Ran, it was a little swollen. The doctor had already reduced the swelling, but he did not expect that it would be so painful when it hardened. Su Meng wriggled in Xiao Yan's arms and moaned. She opened her hazy eyes and looked at the man on top of her. Xiao Yan endured the pain. He should have kissed Su Meng's lips, but instead he kissed her forehead. Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng tenderly. "I will wait until you truly accept me. I want to give you a real wedding night." Su Meng blinked her eyes and then realized that something was wrong. She pushed Xiao Yan away and gathered her collar. She widened her eyes and shouted at Xiao Yan, "What did you do to me? You have a wife. How can you do such a thing to me? Big pervert." Su Meng said hatefully to Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan reached out and pulled Su Meng to his side. Su Meng struggled and hit Xiao Yan's chest with her little fist. "Let go of me, you big pervert." "Yes, I'm a big pervert. What's wrong with me doing such a thing to my wife?" Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng seriously. "You are my only wife in this life." Su Meng's body suddenly froze. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Yan. "You are lying to me. Don't you have a cousin? Remember, I have nothing to do with you." "No, we have nothing to do with each other. You are my cousin-in-law. My wife will always be you. As for Su Ran, I will deal with her." Xiao Yan said gloomily. "Not only Su Ran, but also the Su family. I will take revenge for all the grievances you have suffered. I will also avenge my father-in-law and mother-in-law." Su Meng's face blushed and she was a little touched. Then she said coquettishly, "Who are your father-in-law and mother-in-law? Don't call them that. I have never thought of marrying you." Xiao Yan made a lot of promises to Su Meng. The two people were very affectionate, but there was a little shadow in Xiao Yan's heart, which was his lifeblood. Coming out of Su Meng's small apartment, Xiao Yan went to the hospital. As long as he thought of this, Xiao Yan thought of the woman he hated, the person who was nominally his wife. When he heard the doctor say that it was not wasted, Xiao Yan breathed a sigh of relief and asked why it was so painful when there was a reaction. The doctor said that he had to pay more attention to recuperation and should not have sex in the next 2 months. Su Ran, this bitch. Xiao Yan stepped on the gas and went back to the Xiao family, but Ning Shu arrived home before Xiao Yan. When Ning Shu arrived home, the house was quiet. Even Mr. Xiao and Mrs. Xiao were not at home. He also did not see Su Debao and Su Xiaobao. Ning Shu pulled a servant and asked, "Where are the others in the house?" Seeing that it was the young madam, the servant looked a little indifferent and said, "I don't know." "Oh, anyone in the Xiao family could despise her." Ning Shu grabbed the servant's arm and asked coldly, "Where are they? I'm asking you a question." The servant was frightened by Ning Shu's cold face. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by a roar. "Su Ran," Ning Shu picked his ears. The voice sounded a little familiar. Ning Shu turned his head and saw Xiao Yan, whose face was still bruised. Xiao Yan walked quickly to Ning Shu. Ning Shu roared, "Su Ran, you vicious woman. What's wrong with the servant? Are you starting to abuse the servant now?" Ning Shu sneered. Seeing such a perverted person, he did not want to open his eyes. Now, she had even accused her of being evil. What the fuck was this? Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with undisguised disgust and hatred in his eyes. As long as he thought of the doctor's words, Xiao Yan wanted to tear Ning Shu apart. His beloved woman suffered because of such a vicious, greedy and hypocritical woman. Such a person could not even be compared to Su Meng's hair. When the servant saw Xiao Yan, he quickly said, young master and young miss are in the hospital. Now master and madam are in the hospital. Chapter 78. When Xiao Yan heard that the two babies were sent to the hospital, his face instantly changed and his eyes turned red. Ning Shu roared, "What did you do this time?" Ning Shu was speechless. "What did I do? What did I do? I don't even know why." Su ran, "If anything happens to the two children, I will bury you with them." Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with hatred, turned around and got into the car to go to the hospital. Ning Shu was in a mess. He covered his heart and felt very tired. Why did he feel that the people in this world were so unreasonable and so willful? "Which hospital?" Ning Shu asked the servant lightly. When the servant saw how disgusted the eldest young master was with the young madam, she looked at Ning Shu with even more disdain. It was the same no matter where one bowed to the superior and stepped on the inferior. The servant said unhappily, "I don't know which hospital she is in." Ning Shu looked at the servant indifferently. "I ask you, which hospital? Even if I have no status in this family, I still have the qualification to dismiss you." "In the central hospital." The servant quickly said. Ning Shu planned to go and see what the situation was. The two children were sent to the hospital at the same time. Even Su Debao, who had a high IQ, was sent to the hospital. When Ning Shu arrived at the central hospital, he heard Su Meng's heart-wrenching cry from far away in the corridor. Ning Shu's heart moved. Were the two babies going to die? Impossible. These two were important tools to improve the relationship between Xiao Yan and Su Meng. That's right, tools. In Ning Shu's view, these two children were Su Meng's golden fingers. Su Debao was the breadwinner of the family, and Su Xiaobao was the one who acted spoiled and cute. The two children could clear the obstacles in front of Su Meng. Before they married into the family, they had already won the favor of Su Meng's parents-in-law and helped Su Meng get rid of his annoying wife with his father. This was not a child. This was a complete freak. It was too illogical. Ning Shu walked over and saw Su Meng, who was usually delicate and pretty, on the verge of fainting from crying in Xiao Yan's arms. Xiao Yan kept comforting Su Meng, looking anxious. Old Master Xiao and Madame Xiao were sitting on the chairs, unable to sit still. Ning Shu walked over and successfully received everyone's disgusted gazes. Ning Shu felt very bitter in his heart. It was not easy to be hated by everyone. "What are you doing here?" Xiao Yan raised his chin and looked at Ning Shu. "Don't mess with me, or you'll have to bear the consequences." Ning Shu frowned. She really didn't know how to communicate with these people. Couldn't they talk nicely? They were always yelling and acting cool and arrogant. Ning Shu really couldn't stand it. Su Meng, who was leaning in Xiao Yan's arms, looked at Ning Shu with red eyes and said sadly, "Su Ran, the child is innocent. If you have any dissatisfaction, you can come at me. I just hope that you won't hurt my child." "Ning Shu, can you get out of the arms of someone else's husband? Don't you think it's disgusting to lean in the arms of someone else's husband and say this?" Ning Shu said indifferently, "What did I do to your child?" If she had done something to bear such a crime, Ning Shu wouldn't say anything. But now, she didn't even know what had happened. She was confused and these people were blaming her. He was about to be driven crazy by others. Su Meng stared at Ning Shu with her eyes wide open. Her big almond-shaped eyes were clear and innocent. She emotionally withdrew from Xiao Yan's arms, tears streaming down her face. "Don't come near me. I just want my child to be fine." Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng with pity and tried to hold Su Meng. "It's okay. Our child will be fine." Su Meng struggled in Xiao Yan's arms and cried, "Don't touch me. If I get close to you, my child will be hurt. I don't want anything to happen to my child. Xiao Yan, please let me and my child go." Ning Shu, help, puff, Ning Shu supported herself against the wall with one hand and covered her heart with the other. She was really upset. The protagonist was really capricious and yelled in the hospital. She didn't care much about the two children and could leave them with the Xiao family. She didn't need to worry about the two children at all. Su Meng, who was already a mother of two children, was still living like a young girl. Now she was acting like this again. Ning Shu felt that she was going to vomit blood. "Alright, stop fooling around." Old Master Xiao spoke up to stop the two people's tragic drama. Xiao Yan comforted Su Meng helplessly and asked Mr. Xiao, "Father, what's wrong with the two children?" Ning Shu almost laughed out loud. She was so focused on acting out the scene of life and death with Su Meng that she didn't even know what was going on with her own child. He felt drunk. Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu, who couldn't help laughing, and said to Ning Shu angrily, "It's all your fault. Why did you want to eat abalone? You greedy woman." "Ning Shu, what does it have to do with me?" "Mother, what's going on?" Xiao Yan stared at Ning Shu viciously. "Sure enough, Su Ran, you are really vicious. You won't even let the children go. It's all this woman's fault. She wanted to eat abalone. At noon, the two children ate too much abalone and couldn't digest it. Now they came to the hospital to vomit." Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu. Mr. Xiao also said, "Don't have abalone in the house in the future." Ning Shu, "Mama, I want to go home. The people here are all crazy." Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with disgust. Ning Shu sneered and said, "I wasn't the one who forced them to eat it. I wasn't the one who forced them to eat it. Or was it me who poisoned the abalone? What did it have to do with her? You're still quibbling." If you didn't scare Xiao Bao to tears, the children wouldn't have indigestion. Mrs. Xiao sneered and said, "Ning Shu, she felt so tired. Why were the people in this world so crazy? Where was their logic? Where was their worldview? They blamed everything on her, but these people still acted as if it was natural. They were crazy." Ning Shu felt very bitter. He felt like a normal person living in a crazy world. What were these people's brains used for? Ning Shu thought for a while and understood. She guessed that when she went out and said that she wanted to eat abalone, the two mischievous children didn't want to let her eat it. Then, they ate it themselves and didn't want to leave any for this despicable woman. Children were prone to indigestion. Now, these two children were in the hospital. The abalone was innocent. She was innocent too. No one saw the intentions behind these two children's actions. They were pranks and malicious thoughts. Ning Shu felt that he deserved it for courting death like this. "Su Ran, I won't allow you to hurt my children again." Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu. "I want to divorce you, evil woman." Dream on. He wouldn't divorce her even if he died. Chapter 79. When Ning Shu heard Xiao Yan talk about divorce, she immediately objected. If she divorced Xiao Yan, her task would be over. She had put up with these idiots for so long, and she couldn't lose the task. At least, she couldn't break off the marriage with Xiao Yan in this world. Looking at the arrogant Xiao Yan, Ning Shu said fiercely, "If you say this again, I'll beat you." Ning Shu's words stunned everyone. Xiao Yan's face swelled to a purple hue. "Su Ran, you vicious woman, I'll never fall in love with you. Don't try to bind me with marriage." Xiao Yan roared at Ning Shu, "I will never fall in love with you in this life or the next life, you vicious woman." Ning Shu was almost deafened by Xiao Yan's voice. He picked his ears and said, "Keep your voice down. You're so noisy that you'll disturb the vomit-inducing doctor inside. If you don't pay attention, the vomit-inducing tube will puncture your baby's stomachs." Xiao Yan's heart swelled because of Ning Shu's words, but he had to worry about the two babies, so he looked depressed as if he was constipated. Mrs. Xiao pointed at Ning Shu and said, "You're threatening people?" Mr. Xiao also looked at Ning Shu unkindly. Obviously, he thought that Ning Shu had offended the dignity of men and his son. Su Meng walked to Xiao Yan, and Ning Shu said, "Cousin, Xiao Yan doesn't love you. Why are you so persistent? You want to stay in a marriage without love. A marriage without love is a grave." Ning Shu looked at Su Meng coldly and said, "I have a grave, but you can only die in the wild. You don't even have a grave." Su Meng stamped her feet angrily and said, "I'm just trying to persuade you because we're both women. Don't be ungrateful. Can you not steal other people's husbands for the sake of women? Ning Shu was about to kneel down in front of Su Meng. This logic, this worldview. Ning Shu felt that he was quite powerful when he stood beside someone else's husband and advised them to leave if there was no love between them. However, he was still disgusted by these people. Don't say anything more, Su ran. I'll prepare the document. You just need to sign it. Xiao Yan seemed to be very dignified and said in a very high and mighty manner. At this moment, the two vomit-inducing children were pushed out. They were lying on the hospital beds, their breathing shallow. Their faces were pale, and even their eyes were dim. Everyone no longer cared about the topic of divorce. They all surrounded the child on the hospital bed. Su Meng looked at the two precious eggs and cried loudly as if she was about to die. Ning Shu glanced at the side and then left. She didn't have time to waste on these idiots. Ning Shu only had one thought in her mind. She wanted to leave this world as soon as possible, even if the points were a little less. She really didn't want to stay in this world anymore. This world was really too much. It completely revolved around the main character. If the main character felt that it was right, then it was right. If the main character said that it was wrong, then it was wrong. In such a willful and unreasonable world, normal people would be driven crazy. Ning Shu was sitting in a coffee shop. She was waiting for someone. Ning Shu raised her wrist and looked at her watch. Damn, half an hour had already passed. She didn't have any sense of time at all. The person she was waiting for was late. After looking around the coffee shop, Ning Shu walked over. Sorry, something came up at the company. That's why I'm late. The man sitting opposite her, Ning Shu, apologized. Ning Shu laughed in her heart. If it was the female lead, would you be willing to let her wait for so long? All right, if it wasn't the female lead's life, then there was no need to be pretentious. The man sitting opposite her was a male supporting character. He looked elegant and noble, and his entire body was filled with a bone-deep gentleness and elegance. However, Ning Shu could only see the words gentle supporting male lead written on his forehead in gold. In this day and age, if there was nothing wrong with you, you couldn't be the male lead. For example, the incomparably Chunibyu Xiao Yan had become the male lead, and Li Xiuwen had become the male supporting character. Elegant, gentle, gentlemanly. These were the qualities that a good man should have. Why did a pair of lame eyes fall for that? Xiao Yan? Li Xiuwen was wearing a silver suit. Sitting opposite Ning Shu, he was as beautiful as a painting. His fingers were long and slender, and his knuckles were smooth. Why were the male lead and male supporting characters so lame that they fell for the female lead? Could it be that all men liked naive and muddle-headed women? Was it fun to follow behind the muddle-headed female lead and clean up her mess? You are? Li Xiuwen looked at Ning Shu. His voice was as gentle as water, clear and pleasant to the ears. Ning Shu felt that it was impossible for the other party not to know who she was. She was the female lead's love rival, and Xiao Yan was his love rival. Ning Shu didn't think that Li Xiuwen wouldn't know who she was. What's there to pretend for? We're both revolutionary comrades who want but can't get what we want. We're walking further and further down the path of cannon fodder. Ning Shu coughed, cleared her throat, and went straight to the point. I'm Xiao Yan's wife, I'm Ning. Su ran. Li Xiuwen nodded, and looked at the watch on his wrist. Why are you looking for me? I think I'll be leaving. She made him wait for half an hour, and he had to leave in less than 5 minutes. Ning Shu took back her evaluation of Li Xiuwen. What gentlemanly. What gentlemanly. They were all shit. They were all aimed at the female lead. Don't, handsome. You're leaving so soon. You didn't make me wait for half an hour for nothing. At least let me say something. Ning Shu's words were a bit impolite. Li Xiuwen's slanted eyebrows frowned. In that case, please say it. Ning Shu sensed that Li Xiuwen's attitude towards her was a bit impatient. Su Meng must have said something bad about her in front of this guy. She must have said that she was vicious and hypocritical. Ning Shu could recite all of these words. I'm here to cooperate with you, Ning Shu said directly. I know you like Su Meng, but Su Meng gave birth to 2 children for Xiao Yan. The 2 men are so outstanding. I think Su Meng will have difficulty choosing. Li Xiaowen looked at Ning Shu with a faint smile. Then how should we cooperate? Fuck, he agreed so quickly? Ning Shu saw the smile on Li Xiaowen's face. What was the meaning of this fake smile? Ning Shu originally wanted to leave, but thinking that there was someone even more disgusting than Li Xiaowen, Ning Shu held back. She talked to Li Xiaowen and said, if the Xiao family is gone, do you think Su Meng will choose Xiao Yan? Li Xiaowen's eyes flashed. He shook his head and said, Miss Su, we can't cooperate at all. I won't do anything that will make Meng Meng suffer. Ning Shu clutched her chest and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She had completely forgotten that the supporting male character was also a man who knelt under the halo of the female lead, Mary Sue. He was the type who was heavily poisoned. He was incomparably passionate and would not stop until he died. Ning Shu looked at Li Xiaowen. How noble was this? Li Xiaowen looked at the woman opposite him. Her expression became very interesting. Her expression was so complicated that he could not describe it. Chapter 80. Ning Shu felt that her head had been kicked by a donkey, that's why she was so stupid to work with the supporting male lead. Could it be that idiocy was contagious, and she had already been infected? Speaking of the supporting male lead, Li Xiaowen, his qualifications were good, his family background was good, and he had good looks. Once he saw the female lead, he fell in love with her. When he was studying abroad, he met the pregnant Su Meng, and then took care of her until she came back. After she came back, Su Meng and Xiao Yan were together. Li Xiaowen became the female lead's good brother, and often made the male lead jealous. What kind of moral integrity was this? Li Xiaowen looked at the woman opposite him. Her expression changed a lot, and he didn't know what she was thinking. Li Xiaowen stretched out his smooth fingers and knocked on the table, making a rhythmic knocking sound, which woke up Ning Shu, who was in her own imagination. What do you want to say? Sorry, I have to go first. Li Xiaowen's expression was a little gloomy. Ning Shu guessed that the other party didn't want to see her, this evil woman. Could she just kill those people, and then the mission would be considered complete? Ding! Ning Shu's brain suddenly rang with the sound of electric current. This feeling was too familiar. It had been a long time since she heard the system's voice. What the player thought is not valid. It doesn't conform to the rules of this world. Player, please dispel this thought. The original owner's soul was to change her life, and not to wake up in a women's prison. The system's voice was mechanical and cold, but for some reason, Ning Shu felt that she was ridiculed by the system. Li Xiaowen looked at the woman opposite him again. Her face was twisted, and Li Xiaowen felt that this woman was definitely crazy. Li Xiaowen shook his head and stood up, preparing to leave. He thought to himself, Xiao Yan's wife is actually crazy. When Li Xiaowen stood up, Ning Shu finally reacted. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Li Xiaowen's arm, pulling him back to sit down. She said coldly, I say, what do you mean by this? I haven't even said anything, and you keep making a fuss about leaving. You've had enough. It won't be too late to leave after I'm done talking. Ning Shu looked at Li Xiaowen and said directly, I want to work with you to destroy the Xiao family. I'll give you half of the stolen money as fast as possible. Li Xiaowen raised his eyebrows. Why should I cooperate with you? And what right do you have to talk about cooperation? And you actually want half of the Xiao family's huge corporation? Li Xiao was just short of saying, can you be a little more shameless? Ning Shu sneered. She took out a stack of RMB from her bag and slammed it on the table. I have money. Let's cooperate. But I don't think I gained anything. Li Xiaowen shrugged. I spent so much effort to destroy the Xiao family, and in the end, I have to give half of it to you. Ning Shu almost spat on the handsome face in front of him. He said very unhappily, don't be unsatisfied. You can get a girl. You got Su Meng. What else do you want? You can get Su Meng. What else are you not satisfied with? She was supposed to be the female lead, but in the end, she ended up with a supporting male character like you. You've really hit the jackpot. You've definitely defied the heavens and changed your fate. You've changed your life as a supporting male character, but you still aren't satisfied. Didn't you get Xiao Yan too? Li Xiaowen said indifferently. Ning Shu almost spat on Li Xiaowen's face this time. He spat out all the coffee in his mouth. Half of it was because he was shocked, and the other half was because he was disgusted. Ning Shu's mouth twitched and he sneered. He collected all the RMB on the table and put it in his bag. Li Xiaowen saw Ning Shu's actions and asked in surprise, "Aren't we discussing how to destroy the Shao family? You look like you're planning to leave." "Handsome, I'm leaving first," Ning Shu said expressionlessly. "You deserve to be a supporting male character for the rest of your life." Li Xiaowen blocked in front of Ning Shu. "Sit down. We're discussing. Take out all the money in your bag. Let me see how much money you have." "No," Ning Shu said righteously. "It's not safe to take it out. I'm afraid that someone will steal my money." Li Xiaowen looked at Ning Shu as if he was looking at a lunatic. In the end, Ning Shu and Li Xiaowen reluctantly reached an agreement. Why was it reluctantly? The supporting male character, this bastard, actually wanted to reduce her benefits to 10%. He was just casually giving her a little. Ning Shu couldn't tolerate this at all. If he could get the beauty, even if he lost all his family assets, he would still have profited. In the end, Ning Shu used all kinds of methods and finally reached 40% of the benefits. Friendly reminder, don't find a shell company to fish for her. In front of Su Meng, you still have to pay attention to your pure and innocent image. Ning Shu patted Li Xiaowen's shoulder and left. Ning Shu returned to the Shao family. The house was very quiet. Ning Shu felt very happy. The two elders of the Shao family stayed in the hospital to take care of Jin's son, and Xiao Yan didn't come back either. Ning Shu's liver and lungs were very happy, but Xiao Yan felt very sad. His children were lying on the bed like this. Looking at Su Meng's red and swollen eyes, Xiao Yan felt that if he didn't do anything, he wouldn't be worthy of being a man. Xiao Yan felt that the Su family was very annoying now. They had made so much money from the Shao family, but they still raised such a vicious woman like Su Ran. Especially Su Bo, that old bastard, actually killed Su Meng's parents. He had to get justice for Su Meng. In the end, Xiao Yan still cooperated with the plot. But this time, there was a shadow in Su Bo's heart. He didn't take out all of the Su family's money. He kept some of his family's assets. He still didn't believe that the Shao family would do such a thing to their teammate. When Mrs. Su called Ning Shu to tell him about this, Ning Shu just kept silent and didn't say anything. Since the Su family trusted the Shao family and Xiao Yan so much, then let the Su family suffer a loss. Ning Shu didn't want to spend so much effort to protect the Su family only to be pushed to Su Meng by his brainless brother. That would be a terrible thing. Ning Shu asked Li Xiaowen to act quickly. Now Xiao Yan had already acted. When Xiao Yan was at his proudest, when he was full of himself, he would give him a blow. Su Debao and Su Xiaobao, who were sick, took advantage of their illness to act coquettishly and play cute. They tried their best to bring the two together and cultivate the relationship between Su Meng and Xiao Yan. For a time, the ward was filled with the voices of the two children and pink bubbles of love. The two elders looked at each other and smiled. The picture was harmonious and beautiful, like a loving family. Every time Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng with a burning gaze. When Su Meng took something, he deliberately held Su Meng's hand, making Su Meng blush. Especially in a hidden place in the hospital, the two hugged and kissed sweetly. Not far away, there were two children watching with a mischievous expression. Chapter 81. Su Meng and Xiao Yan's relationship quickly heated up. They broke through the last line of defense and rolled around together. As for Ning Shu, the official wife, she lived alone in a spacious house. Even her voice echoed. However, Ning Shu was very comfortable. As long as the two of them did not do it in front of her, Ning Shu could pretend that she did not know anything. When Ning Shu saw Li Xiaowen's dark face, she was gloating in her heart. Ning Shu had only experienced two worlds before this. In the first world, she was lucky enough to meet the perverted genetic scientist and school doctor with the codename Madman. In the second world, she used the identity of a princess and solved the problem with a whip. She had not experienced a business war yet. Therefore, Ning Shu participated in the plan to destroy the Shao family. Ning Shu was now trying to learn as much as possible. If she had the ability to build a business empire, she would not need to cooperate with Li Xiaowen. Ning Shu had to learn. When he saw Ning Shu, Li Xiuwen's face was very ugly. Seeing that Ning Shu acted as if nothing had happened, he could not help but say, "Your husband is cheating. Why don't you do anything?" Ning Shu was also speechless. The person you liked was sleeping with someone else. What was the use of being angry with me? Didn't I tell you to speed up? With the speed of their passion, it is normal for them to roll around together. If there is a first time, there will be a second time. There will be many times in the future. You will get used to it. Ning Shu comforted Li Xiuwen. In the beginning, Su Meng did not accept Xiao Yan. Although she gave birth to 2 children for him, Su Meng was still very reserved. Now that her relationship with Xiao Yan was progressing smoothly, they would definitely deepen their relationship. The living room, the sofa, the kitchen, could be the scene of passion. Ning Shu comforted Li Xiuwen as if he was looking at a green-haired turtle. Li Xiuwen was not comforted by Ning Shu. Instead, his face became even uglier. He looked at Ning Shu in disbelief. "Your husband is with another woman." Li Xiuwen didn't know how to describe Ning Shu. He tapped his fingers on the table in frustration. "You love your Xiao Yan so much that you don't even care when he's with other women." Love my ass, she loves Xiao Yan? Even a fool could tell that she didn't love Xiao Yan. Did it mean that everything she did had to be related to love? Why didn't she say that she was interested in the Xiao family's money? All right, the supporting male lead had already been provoked to the point of insanity. Ning Shu only said, "Let's act quickly. Otherwise, their relationship will only get better and better. You know." Ning Shu's Li Xiuwen raised his eyebrows, looking a little wretched. Li Xiuwen took a deep breath and pointed at the door. "Get lost." Ning Shu shook his head and walked away. When he returned to the Xiao family, the servant told Ning Shu that someone was waiting for him in the living room. Ning Shu walked into the living room and saw the Su family sitting on the sofa waiting for her. Seeing Ning Shu, Madame Su forced a smile on her face and asked, "Ran Air, how have you been recently?" Ning Shu's Madame Su smiled and said, "Very good." Since the last time Ning Shu went to the Su family and beat up the original owner's brother, Ning Shu never returned to the Su family. It felt like they would never talk to each other again. Now that she suddenly came looking for him, Ning Shu thought for a moment and knew that it was about the cooperation. He would rather believe Xiao Yan than his daughter. What was the use of looking for her now? It was useless. Ahem. Su Bo coughed and said, "Ran Air, you knew about this beforehand?" Su Bo's eyes were a little complicated, and then he said with a little decadence, "This time the Su family really suffered a great loss. Our family's assets are not even 1/10 of what it was before." Ning Shu faintly said, "Oh," without any expression. The situation now was much better than in the plot. The original Su family was fragmented. At that time, Su Bo directly took Su Lan and ran away, leaving the original owner and Madame Su behind. The 2 weak women became prostitutes. It could be said that she, a vicious cannon fodder, was reduced to such a situation. It could be said that she vented her hatred, but Su de Bao still came to the nightclub to humiliate her. So, was it really good for such a small child to go to the nightclub? And because he was the son of President Xiao Yan, Su de Bao made things difficult for him, and the nightclub refused to accept her. She grew up spoiled and had no means to make a living. In the end, Su Ran was poor and died of a heart disease. It felt like she was drunk. "Can you tell Xiao Yan to borrow some money from the Xiao family, so that the Su family has some liquid funds?" Su Bo said. Ning Shu directly rolled his eyes. They were clearly messing with her, and they still wanted to lend her money. Even if Xiao Yan was a moron, he wouldn't lend her money. He was deliberately sending her to the Xiao clan to test their attitude. Didn't Dad say that women shouldn't be involved in business matters? Ning Shu directly refused. Ning Shu felt that the original owner was quite naive. She thought that by protecting the Su family, they wouldn't end up in the plot. With the support of her family, they wouldn't be so miserable. She didn't think that Su Bo didn't care about them at all. Hearing Su Ran's refusal, Su Bo's face suddenly became ugly, and said, "You were born in the Su family, and the Su family gave you glory and wealth. Now they want you to pay a little, and you refuse. You have to think about it. Without the Su family, it will be difficult for you to move forward in the Xiao family." Mrs. Su looked at her husband, and then looked at Ning Shu. In the end, she sighed and didn't say anything. Su Lan said to Su Bo, "Dad, I told you not to beg her. Su Ran only has herself in her heart. She's selfish and vicious." Ning Shu looked up at Su Lan and said expressionlessly, "You either shut up, or I'll beat you until you shut up. Who do you think you are? Why are you shouting at me? If you have the guts, go find Xiao Yan, who set you up. You're as cowardly as a woman. Now that the Su family has no money, you can go sell yourself." Su Lan's face instantly turned red. She clenched her fists and looked at Ning Shu with bloodshot eyes. She roared, "Su Ran, I dare you to insult me one more time. Even if I go ask for a favor, I won't come back to beg a vicious woman like you." Su Lan turned around and was about to leave, but she was stopped by Su Bo. Su Lan said with grievance and anger, "Dad, let's go. Let Su Ran be complacent. Listen to what she said. She doesn't have the Su family in her heart, and she doesn't have me, her brother. She only has herself in her heart." Hearing Su Lan's accusations, Ning Shu couldn't help but think that the men kneeling under the halo of Mary Su were all so self-righteous and willful. They always stood on the moral high ground and criticized others, but never reflected on their own behavior. Su Lan always said that she didn't have him as her brother in her heart. Then what about Su Lan, her brother, who was biased to Su Meng, and treated her sister like an enemy? Chapter 82. There were so many evil things in this world that Ning Shu had the urge to destroy the world. Hearing Su Lan's righteous accusation, Ning Shu was speechless. What a twisted world. Ning Shu couldn't bear it anymore. People who had never eaten the food of mortals and had never come into contact with society were just so willful. "Dad, I can't do anything about this. You should go back. Don't you still have some money? You can make a comeback." The current situation was much better than in the plot. If they were still not satisfied, it could only be said that people were really too greedy. "Dad, I'll say, shut up. You're not allowed to speak, or I'll beat you until you can't speak." Su Lan was interrupted by Ning Shu as soon as she opened her mouth. Su Lan looked at Ning Shu with resentment and fear. Ning Shu didn't pay attention to Su Lan's eyes. In Ning Shu's eyes, Su Lan wasn't a man at all. He didn't have the responsibility that a man should have. He was a person with the same virtue as Xiao Yan. Su Bo heard his daughter's rejection again and his old face couldn't hold it anymore. He glared at Ning Shu and was about to leave when he suddenly heard a servant shout, "Master and Madam are back. Hurry up and come out to greet them." In a short while, 2 rows of servants stood neatly from the door to the living room. Such a big lineup. First, old Master Xiao got down from his body, followed by Xiao Yan holding Su Xiaobao and Su Meng holding Su Debao. Stepping on the carpet, the family of 6 slowly walked in. Old Master Xiao was incomparably dignified, Madame Xiao was graceful and luxurious, and Xiao Yan was holding a little princess in a fluffy dress. Xiao Yan's peerless beauty matched with the little princess's cuteness and sweetness like an angel. Just by looking at them, one would feel that they were the best things in the world. Ning Shu's mouth twitched. They were quite good at acting. Ning Shu looked at Su Meng. Her face was white with a little rosy, and her whole body seemed to be shrouded in the rosy clouds. Her whole body was full of charm. It seemed that she was well nourished by Xiao Yan. When Xiao Yan saw Ning Shu in the living room, his handsome face immediately showed disdain, disgust, and all kinds of negative emotions. When Su Meng saw Ning Shu, a trace of uneasiness flashed across her face. However, she immediately strengthened the belief in her heart. She and Xiao Yan truly loved each other, and Xiao Yan did not love Su Ran. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Xiao." Su Bo greeted old Master Xiao and Mrs. Xiao enthusiastically. Raising his eyelids, old man Xiao glanced at Su Bo and faintly said, "I'm sorry for the lack of hospitality. The child has just been discharged from the hospital, and he needs someone to take care of him." Su Bo's face stiffened. He forced a smile and said, "The child is more important." Su Lan looked at Su Meng and asked, "Cousin, are the 2 children okay?" Su Meng immediately revealed a charming smile, but with a trace of lingering fear, she said, "It's all right. Come, quickly greet your uncle." Su Meng greeted the 2 children. Su Debao and Su Xiaobao called out crisply, "Uncle?" A smile appeared on Su Lan's face, and he looked very excited. He repeatedly said, "Don't get sick again in the future. Don't make your mother anxious." Su Xiaobao secretly looked at Ning Shu and said in a childish and naive voice, "Uncle is different from her." Ning Shu looked at the side and was also drunk. He was really drunk. Looking at Su Lan's actions, Ning Shu felt that there was no one in the world more speechless than Su Lan. His own father was humble to others, but he couldn't see it. He was incomparably kind to the two children. This kind of person was lucky to be born in a rich family. If he was born in a lower class of society, he would have died countless times. Mrs. Su, who was standing beside Ning Shu, saw this scene and was so angry that she almost fainted. Her son was actually fawning over the little bitch and the little bitch's children. Ning Shu reached out and held Mrs. Su's hand. He could completely understand Mrs. Su's bad feeling. Ning Shu glanced at the two children. Su Debao and Su Xiaobao immediately put on a frightened look and hugged Xiao Yan's legs, as if Ning Shu was going to do something to them. Xiao Yan immediately protected his children, looked around at the Su family, and said disdainfully and condescendingly, "Since you are all here, I'll tell you the matter. Su Ran and I." Xiao Yan pointed at Ning Shu and said, "I want to divorce her. We'll divorce now." Hearing that Xiao Yan wanted to divorce, the Xiao family didn't have any reaction, but the Su family was in an uproar, especially Mrs. Su, who directly asked Mrs. Xiao, "Why do you suddenly want a divorce? What did my daughter do wrong? Even if you want a divorce, you have to give us an explanation." Su Bo's face was also livid. He was counting on his daughter to get some working capital from the Xiao family, but now his daughter was directly kicked out of the family. At this time, Su Bo really understood that the Xiao family deliberately took over 90% of the Su family's assets. Su Bo looked a little decadent for a moment. Ning Shu's face was indifferent, without any expression. He didn't cry, didn't make a fuss, and didn't even have a sad expression. Su Meng said to Ning Shu, "Although there are many misunderstandings between us, I still hope that you can find someone who loves you. I once wanted to take revenge, but now..." Su Meng and Xiao Yan looked at each other and smiled. They held hands and said, "There are better things in the world. Cousin, you should also let go and find a new life. Your persistence is very painful for everyone." Ning Shu felt his stomach churning. "Please don't be so disgusting." The Su family was cheated by the Xiao family, and now they said that they didn't want to take revenge and wanted to live a happy life together. Let her quit and let them be. Ning Shu felt that his worldview was broken into dumplings. "I absolutely don't agree with the divorce," Madame Su said with a pale face. She glared at Su Meng with deep hatred in her eyes. Xiao Yan blocked Madame Su's eyes from looking at Su Meng so that his beloved woman wouldn't be frightened. He sneered and said, "Like mother like daughter, both of you are equally vicious. You must divorce, even if you don't want to." Su Lan frowned and said to Madame Su, "There is no love between sister and brother-in-law. Mom, if you force the two of them to be together, it will only cause more misfortune and pain." Madame Su looked at her calendar in disbelief, and her body staggered twice. Slap, slap, Ning Shu slapped Su Lan twice. Su Lan looked at Ning Shu with resentment and said, "You hit me again." Su Meng pointed at Ning Shu and said, How can you hit people?" Then she looked at Su Lan with comforting eyes. Xiao Yan saw this scene and remembered the scene when he was hit by Ning Shu in the hospital. This time, he felt as if he was hit in the face. It was very painful. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with red eyes. Chapter 83. Ning Shu listened to these people talking about love your sister. At this time, in this world, except for love, there was no responsibility. Ning Shu's heart was filled with anger. When she came to this world, she had been enduring this group of idiots. She didn't want to argue with them, but in the end, she would directly kill them. It was too irritable. Ning Shu slapped Su Lan a few more times, and then directly kicked Su Lan away, and then walked in front of Xiao Yan with a cold face. Xiao Yan was much taller than Ning Shu. In Xiao Yan's eyes, she could definitely be regarded as petite, but Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu who was walking towards her step by step. Her face was extremely cold, and her eyes were filled with a dense and awe-inspiring murderous aura. This kind of Su Ran unexpectedly made Xiao Yan's heart tighten. He involuntarily took 2 steps back, and then realized that he couldn't show his fear in front of such a vicious woman. He straightened his chest and sneered, "You are so vicious to your own brother. Xiao family will never tolerate such a vicious woman like you." Ning Shu looked at Xiao Yan and directly swept her leg towards Xiao Yan, making Xiao Yan fall to the ground. Although her fighting skills were at the level of trash according to the system's evaluation, this kind of sudden attack still had some effect. Su Meng pointed at Ning Shu and opened her mouth wide. Ning Shu quickly gave Su Meng a slap in the face, and then backhanded another slap in the face. Su Meng's face was swollen, and she stared at Ning Shu with wide eyes. Xiao Yan, who was suddenly tripped and fell to the ground, was dizzy. Seeing this vicious woman actually hit Su Meng, he wanted to get up. Ning Shu stretched out her foot and fiercely stepped on Xiao Yan's chest, and it was the position of his heart. Suddenly, Xiao Yan's face became pale, and he took a deep breath. "Wah, Grandma, I'm scared," the 2 children shouted at the top of their lungs. Obviously, they were really scared. Even Su Debao looked at Ning Shu with a horrified face. Ning Shu said coldly, "Shut up." Ning Shu's voice was filled with murderous intent, which immediately shut the 2 children's mouths and kept burping. Su Debao looked at Ning Shu with gloomy eyes. His eyes were filled with resentment as he looked at Ning Shu. "How dare you? What are you doing?" Madame Xiao pointed at Ning Shu and screamed. The Su family members were all stunned by Ning Shu's valiance. Old Master Xiao looked at Ning Shu sternly and coldly. "You're out of control. You're treating the Xiao family as nothing." The old couple's faces were livid, especially when they saw that the 2 children were scared out of their wits by Ning Shu. They felt distressed and angry. Ning Shu faintly clapped his hands and mercilessly stepped on Xiao Yan's chest, which made Xiao Yan's face paler, and he groaned. Obviously, she was a woman, but why did she have so much strength? When she stepped on his chest, it felt like his heart was going to explode. What made Xiao Yan even more unbearable was that his dignity was being dismembered. Who is he, Xiao Yan? This woman, how dare she? Xiao Yan's heart was filled with murderous intent. Ning Shu retracted his leg and looked around at the people. When they met Ning Shu's eyes, everyone felt their scalp tingle. "Whoever mentions divorce to me, I will kill him first." Xiao Yan, who got up from the ground, had a murderous look in his eyes, which was exactly the same as Su Debao's. Su Meng covered her face and looked at Ning Shu as if she had committed a heinous crime. "You're hopeless." Xiao Yan didn't mention divorce at this time. He took Su Meng and the 2 children and left directly. There was a kind of determination to never return. Ning Shu sneered and looked at the backs of the 4 people. "Don't think about returning to this villa in your life." The Su family also left with Su Lan, whose face was swollen like a pig's head. Su Bo was cold. What happened just now directly broke the relationship between the 2 families. The Su family was really declining. Mrs. Su looked at Ning Shu with worry in her eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Xiao looked at Ning Shu coldly and directly ignored Ning Shu. Their faces were full of reluctance to part with the 2 children. Ning Shu didn't care about the disgusted look of the 2 children at all. On this side, Xiao Yan took Su Meng and the 2 children back to Su Meng's small apartment. As soon as they entered the apartment, the 2 children hugged Xiao Yan's thigh and cried sadly. Xiao Yan had never seen the 2 children cry like this. The 2 children had always been very sensible. Xiao Yan's heart ached when they cried. He quickly hugged the 2 children and coaxed them. Then he saw Su Meng sitting on the sofa and covering her face. He walked over and hugged Su Meng. He gently touched Su Meng's face and said with gritted teeth, "Don't worry, I will avenge you. Su Ran bullied me several times. I will never let it go." The 2 children surrounded Xiao Yan. Su Debao wiped his tears and said, "Dad, will all women bully Mom in the future?" "Don't worry, there will be no future." Xiao Yan touched Su Debao's head and said coldly, "There will be no future. I will directly make Su Ran, that vicious woman, disappear. A woman who doesn't know what's good for her. If she doesn't want a divorce, she can go to hell." Su Debao's mouth curled up. Su Xiaobao smiled through tears. He hugged Xiao Yan's arm and kept shaking it. Dad, you are so good. Su Meng's face was uneasy. She looked at him with her almond-like eyes and said, "This is not good. Mom, you are too kind. Such a vicious woman should be punished." Su Debao said like an old man. Yes, brother is right." Su Xiaobao nodded with an innocent and cute expression. Su Meng's face showed a smile. She pulled the wound on her face and immediately groaned in pain. This immediately made the other three nervous and took turns to comfort her. Su Meng felt very happy in her heart. Although there was still Su Ran in the middle, she firmly believed that her love with Xiao Yan would be complete and happy. Ning Shu didn't know about the chatter here. He got the news from Li Xiuwen that he was already taking action. It seemed that the other party had already taken the bait. This trap was not directly aimed at Xiao Yan, but at the people in Xiao Yan's company. Suddenly, Ning Shu felt a chill on his back and his heart jumped. This feeling was the same as when he was in the war in the last world. When he encountered danger, it was a kind of warning. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes. He guessed that he had angered Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan really wanted to turn him into his dead wife and then live together with Su Meng, loving each other and having a happy sex life. With the warning in his heart, Ning Shu directly stayed in the Xiao family and didn't go out at all. Every day, he listened to Mrs. Xiao scolding him indirectly. How unpleasant her words were. They went into Ning Shu's left ear and out the right ear. However, when Mrs. Xiao met Ning Shu's cold eyes, Mrs. Xiao was stunned. Regarding Xiao Yan leaving the Xiao family, Old Master Xiao and Mrs. Xiao both had a supportive attitude. Being ignored and disliked by her own husband, what could be worse than this punishment for a woman? She deserved to be disliked by her own husband. She deserved to be abandoned by her own husband. Mrs. Xiao looked at Ning Shu's back and thought fiercely in her heart. Chapter 84. Ning Shu clearly felt that the atmosphere in the Xiao family was not right recently. No matter what she did, she always felt that someone was spying on her. And it was a malicious spying, which made the hair on Ning Shu's back stand up. She felt a sense of danger approaching. Ning Shu dared to guarantee with the head of this body that it was definitely that bastard Xiao Yan's masterpiece. Ning Shu tried to find the malicious gaze, but she couldn't find it. Ning Shu could only be very careful. But what made Ning Shu happy was that she was close to destroying the Xiao family. Facing Mrs. Zhao's cynicism every day, Ning Shu treated it as the last bark of a dead dog. Ning Shu's lack of response made Mrs. Xiao hate Ning Shu even more. Every day, she tortured Ning Shu in different ways. For example, she didn't let the servants wash clothes for Ning Shu, didn't let Ning Shu cook for her. In short, she degraded Ning Shu's status to be lower than a servant's. She mocked Ning Shu as a hen that couldn't lay eggs in front of her. Ning Shu was speechless. She had once broken an egg. Mrs. Xiao was deliberately rubbing on Ning Shu's wound. Every time she heard such words, this body would show a sense of hatred and sadness. That was to say, the person facing Mrs. Xiao now was Ning Shu. If it was the original owner, she would have been driven crazy by Mrs. Xiao. It seemed that the current Mrs. Xiao hated her even more than in the plot. She guessed that what she did was worse than the original owner. And old man Xiao didn't see all of this, which was obviously a tacit agreement. Ning Shu didn't care about the attitude of the two elders of the Xiao family. She only cared about the people in this house who were full of malice towards her. Xiao Yan hadn't come back for almost half a month. This made the Xiao family look at Ning Shu with even more disdain. Ning Shu. That night, Ning Shu slept until the middle of the night. His heart was beating violently, and it was beating irregularly. His body was sweating profusely. When Ning Shu opened his eyes, he saw something shining above him. Under the moonlight, it reflected a cold light. Ning Shu's body was faster than his brain. He immediately rolled away. Then he heard the dull sound of a knife hitting the bed. Damn, someone directly used a knife to cut her. Such a simple and crude method made Ning Shu really stunned for a moment. Ning Shu had thought of countless ways this person could deal with her, but she did not expect the other party to be so direct. The person in the dark failed and turned around to run. Ning Shu didn't even think about it. He quickly kicked the person and heard the sound of a body falling to the ground. Ning Shu quickly turned on the light and looked at the person on the ground. He saw that it was a woman with a big knife in her hand. It was the kind of knife used to chop bones. It was very big. If the knife was cut at the neck, her head would be separated from her body immediately. The sudden light made people very uncomfortable. The woman on the ground blocked it with her hand first. Before she could react, the knife in her hand was snatched away by Ning Shu. After snatching the knife, Ning Shu stepped on the woman on the ground. The middle-aged woman on the ground cried out in pain, breaking the silence of the night. Ning Shu dragged the woman by the collar and dragged her to the living room. After a while, a lot of people gathered in the living room. Even Mr. Xiao and Mrs. Xiao were alarmed. Mrs. Xiao looked at Ning Shu and said with dissatisfaction, "What are you doing in the middle of the night? Do you have to make everyone restless?" Ning Shu glanced at Mrs. Xiao coldly. He kicked the woman on the ground and said, "This person wants to kill me. I called the police." Ning Shu knew the woman who wanted to kill him. She seemed to be the cook of the Xiao family. When Mr. Xiao heard that Ning Shu had called the police, he immediately said sternly, "What are you doing? You actually called the police. You called the police for such a small matter. Don't you feel ashamed? You're fine. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Ning Shu was speechless. Look at these words. If she hadn't dodged quickly, she would have been dead today. These people were just standing there and talking. Ning Shu found that this world was really twisted. There seemed to be no awareness of the law. The male lead seemed to be omnipotent and could solve anything. There was no such thing as the police. It seemed that the male lead didn't have anything to do with killing people. Instead, they felt that the male lead was very cool. Not long after, the police came whistling. Soon, the police came in. The leader asked, "Who called the police?" Ning Shu didn't say anything. Mr. Xiao looked at the room full of police and said with dissatisfaction, "Disturbing people in the middle of the night. That dignity, that arrogance, as if he was very amazing." Ning Shu really felt drunk. No matter how powerful the Xiao family was, in the end, they were still businessmen. In front of the national organization, this attitude of, "I'm the boss," really made Ning Shu drunk. He finally knew where Xiao Yan's personality came from. It was from the same bloodline. The leader was choked by Mr. Zhao's attitude. After all, he was a member of the national organization. It was impossible for him to be so humble to others. In addition, in the middle of the night, he was still in bed. The leader's face was very ugly. Ning Shu said, "I called the police. The person on the ground tried to kill me. This is the tool." Ning Shu said as he handed the knife to the leader. Ning Shu's face showed fear and hesitation. He said to the leader, "I don't know why she wants to kill me." The leader didn't care that the murderer was half dead. The victim was alive and kicking. He directly said to the team members, "Arrest her." The two police officers dragged the woman on the ground away. This attitude made Mr. Xiao very dissatisfied. He snorted and looked very dissatisfied. "Which police team are you from? How can you do things without any rules?" In Mr. Zhao's view, this cook was a member of the Xiao family. The other party's attitude was simply not putting the Xiao family in his eyes. The leader ignored Mr. Xiao. Ning Shu said, "You go with them and make a statement." Ning Shu was very cooperative. He went to the police station to make a statement. Before he left, he hinted to the police that a cook wouldn't be so bold. There must be something hidden. Ning Shu only came out of the police station when the sun rose after dealing with all the miscellaneous matters. He looked back at the police station. The fish couldn't get out of the abyss. The country's weapons couldn't be shown to others. Some of the country's powerful abilities wouldn't be shown to the world. In front of the country, the Xiao family was nothing. Ning Shu returned to the Xiao family. What he received was Mr. Zhao's extremely disgusted look. Mr. Zhao's attitude was as if he was controlling other people's fate. He didn't know why the Xiao family felt superior for no reason. He didn't know where this sense of superiority came from. Was it because Xiao Yan was the protagonist of this world? As soon as Ning Shu stepped into the Xiao family, Xiao Yan came back with the two babies. Xiao Yan had a smile on his face and his whole body was relaxed. Even the two children had a sweet smile on their faces. Chapter 85. When Xiao Yan and the two children walked into the Xiao family and saw Ning Shu, their faces froze at the same time, showing an incredible expression. Xiao Yan was an adult, so he immediately put away his disappointed look, but the two children pursed their lips and were about to cry, especially Su Xiaobao, who burst into tears. Su Xiaobao cried angrily and wiped his tears, looking at Ning Shu with annoyance and disappointment. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. Were they disappointed to see that she was not dead and was still here? Seeing the two precious eggs, Old Master Xiao and Madame Xiao immediately had smiles on their faces. They repeatedly said that they wanted to die. They missed them so much that their hearts ached. As soon as the two children came, the heavy atmosphere in the Xiao family was immediately dispelled. Su Xiaobao acted coquettishly and cutely while looking at Ning Shu with hatred. When Ning Shu's eyes met Xiao Yan's, Xiao Yan suddenly felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured on him, and then he was frozen. That feeling of being seen through, as if Qin Haodong knew everything in his mind, Xiao Yan's heart was filled with anger and guilt. "You vicious woman, what have you done this time?" Xiao Yan roared at Ning Shu first. Ning Shu looked at him coldly and took a step forward. Xiao Yan unconsciously took a step back. Then he realized that he was afraid of this vicious and hypocritical woman, so he immediately shouted angrily, "You!" At this time, a man in a police uniform came in. It was the captain of the police team last night. When the captain came in, no one in the Xiao family greeted him. Captain Ning Shu asked, "Captain, did the woman confess?" The captain looked at Ning Shu and said, "Yes, she said that she wanted to kill you because she hated you." "Damn, what did she have against a female chef?" Ning Shu glanced at Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan was sitting on the sofa with a complacent look on his face. He looked at the police with contempt. Captain Ning Shu said, "According to her confession, it was because you always insulted her, said that her food was not delicious, and always picked on her. You even beat and scolded her, which made her hate you." Ning Shu was speechless. Xiao Yan sneered. "Su Ran, you're so vicious that you're torturing the servants." Ning Shu turned his head and looked at Xiao Yan. His heart was filled with murderous intent. He wanted to kill her and accuse her of being evil. He wondered what benefits Xiao Yan had given that chef. The captain didn't say anything and left after exchanging a few words with Ning Shu. Ning Shu looked at the complacent Xiao Yan. Ning Shu sneered. Seeing that Ning Shu was not dead, Xiao Yan was very disappointed. Now he didn't even want to look at Ning Shu and left with the two children. Although Mr. and Mrs. Xiao wanted to stay with the two children all the time, it was not safe for the two children to stay in the Xiao family because of the vicious woman Ning Shu. Ning Shu turned a blind eye to all kinds of eyes and silently waited for the Xiao family to collapse. This morning, the atmosphere in the Xiao family was very tense, like a bowstring that had been pulled close. Ning Shu, on the other hand, was eating breakfast leisurely. Mr. Xiao sat on the sofa, holding his walking stick tightly and looking frighteningly solemn. Mrs. Xiao saw that Ning Shu was still eating at this time, so she glared at Ning Shu. After a while, Xiao Yan came in with Su Meng and the two children. He asked Mr. Xiao, "Dad, what's going on? Why did the company's shares fall?" Mr. Xiao slammed his walking stick. "A large number of people have been selling shares since last night. I thought it could be controlled in the morning, but now it has fallen." Su Meng didn't understand business matters. Instead, she looked at Ning Shu and complained, "Su Ran, what time is it now? Why are you still eating so leisurely? Aren't you worried at all?" Ning Shu looked at Su Meng indifferently. "Oh, your face is fine. Don't talk nonsense in front of me." Su Meng was so scared that she covered her face with her hands. She stared at Ning Shu with her watery eyes full of accusation. Seeing that his mother was being bullied, Su Debao opened his arms in front of Su Meng and shouted, "Don't bully my mother, you vicious woman." Damn, what did she do? Why was she so vicious? She hadn't even started to be vicious. Su Meng squatted down and hugged Su Debao. "Mom is fine. With you protecting Mom, no one in the world can hurt Mom." "Yes, I will always protect Mom." Su Debao's face was firm. His face was shining with a holy light. He pointed at Ning Shu. "Don't even think about hurting my mother." Ning Shu was speechless. He seemed to have done something to Su Meng. The Xiao family's company collapsed. The stock market fell. Many shareholders directly blocked the company's door and made a scene. Some even threw feces into the company. The former overlord fell. Ning Shu was not surprised. Not only did Li Xiaowen want to deal with the Xiao family, but other opponents of the Xiao family also wanted to tear a piece of the Xiao family's flesh. It could be said that the result of many parties directly pulled down the Xiao family. Sure enough, this was a battlefield without spilling blood. Everything changed in an instant. The Xiao family was completely defeated. It was so fast that the Xiao family didn't even realize what was going on. They went bankrupt just like that. Mr. Xiao seemed to have aged 10 years. In the end, he had no choice but to announce the bankruptcy of the Xiao family. Since the Xiao family went bankrupt, this house belonged to the bank. The Xiao family could no longer live here. This made Mr. Xiao almost vomit blood. He actually had such an ending after dominating for a lifetime. The development of the matter was dazzling and unpredictable. Ning Shu truly felt that the supporting male lead was not bad compared to the male lead. He was even better than the male lead. He made the Xiao family go bankrupt so easily. Such an amazing person liked the female lead and desperately wanted to be the male lead. Just when the Xiao family was in a precarious situation, the captain directly led a group of policemen and detained Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan struggled violently and shouted, "Why are you arresting me? How can you arrest people for no reason? Is there any rule?" Old Man Xiao said coldly. Although the Xiao family was in decline now, Old Man Xiao was still unyielding. When facing the captain, he still had a high and mighty appearance. The captain expressionlessly took out a piece of paper and said, "This is the arrest warrant." The suspect, Xiao Yan, tried to hire someone to kill his wife. Now we want to take him back for interrogation. Xiao Yan's body stiffened. He looked at Ning Shu with hatred and roared, "You vicious woman, I won't let you go." Ning Shu suddenly felt that he was looking for trouble by arguing with such a person. Ning Shu ignored the roaring Xiao Yan and said to the captain, "Captain, look, he is still threatening me." As soon as Ning Shu said this, he immediately received several resentful eyes, including Su Meng and a large group of Xiao family members. "Cousin, how can you do this?" Su Meng took 2 steps back with an incredulous expression. "Do you hate Xiao Yan that much? Do you feel better after doing this? If you do this, Xiao Yan will hate you even more. He will never love you." Ning Shu didn't say anything and directly slapped Su Meng. "Shut up or I will pull out your tongue." Chapter 86. In the end, Xiao Yan was still taken away. Putting aside the fact that Su Meng and Xiao Yan were separated by life and death, it was just like how Bai Suzhen was going to be locked up in Leifeng Pagoda. Su Meng chased after the police car for a long time and finally collapsed on the road. Su Debao and Su Xiaobao hugged each other and cried. Su Debao looked at Ning Shu with eyes full of gloomy hatred. Although Xiao Yan was taken away, for some reason, the 2 elders of the Xiao family seemed to be very sure that Xiao Yan was fine. This made Ning Shu feel that Old Man Xiao had some tricks up his sleeves. However, Old Man Xiao actually told Ning Shu to get Xiao Yan back, saying that it was just a misunderstanding. Hearing Old Man Xiao's words and attitude, Ning Shu was shocked. Treating the government agency as the servants of the Xiao family, they would let Xiao Yan go just because she said a word? Ning Shu didn't pay attention to Old Man Xiao at all and did what she should do. Old Man Xiao was so angry that he hit the floor tiles with his crutch. Ning Shu felt that this guy was simply a wooden club. The bank was about to take away the house. Shouldn't he be worried about where to live in the future? Sure enough, not long after Xiao Yan was arrested, the bank came to seal up the whole house. Everything was pasted with a note, indicating that this thing no longer belonged to the Xiao family. Even Mrs. Zhao's jewelry was taken away. Su Meng's small apartment that Xiao Yan gave her was taken away. Su Meng took the 2 children to the house arranged by Li Xiaowen. Li Xiaowen was considerate and sent a servant to take care of them. Su Meng didn't mention all kinds of thanks, but Old Man Xiao wasn't so lucky and was directly driven out. Old Man Xiao and Mrs. Zhao's faces were ugly. The old couple who had enjoyed half of their lives suddenly didn't know where to go. Ning Shu took her suitcase and was about to leave. Mrs. Xiao saw that Ning Shu was about to leave and quickly grabbed Ning Shu and asked anxiously, "Where are you going? You took the Xiao family's money and are ready to run away." Ning Shu, when did she take the Xiao family's money? If the loot that Li Xiuwen gave her was indeed the Xiao family's money. Of course, Mrs. Xiao didn't know that her daughter-in-law had colluded with others to destroy the Xiao family. However, she and old Master Xiao didn't know where to go now, so naturally, they had to rely on Ning Shu. The two of them didn't care about Ning Shu's expression. They just followed Ning Shu. Ning Shu sneered. He ignored the two of them and went to a small district. Ning Shu bought a house in this district in case of a situation like today. Mrs. Xiao walked into the room with a look of disdain on her face. Why is the room so small? All the rooms added together were not even as big as the villa's kitchen. Mr. Xiao also showed dissatisfaction on his face. Ning Shu said, "You let us live in such a house." Ning Shu said indifferently, "If you don't want to live here, you can leave." This house was not small. It was more than 100 square meters. Mrs. Xiao and old Master Xiao couldn't find a place to live at the moment, so they could only stay here. When it was time to eat, the two of them sat at the dining table and looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu sneered directly. "If you want to eat, do it yourself. There are no servants here to serve you." He took his suitcase and left. Mrs. Xiao was so angry that her body was trembling. She cursed loudly in the house. In the end, old Master Xiao was so hungry that he asked Mrs. Xiao to prepare food. Mrs. Xiao was someone who was served by others. She didn't do any household chores. Now that she suddenly had to cook, the taste was imaginable. After old Master Xiao ate it, he had diarrhea for the whole day. Ning Shu went to see Li Xiuwen. Li Xiuwen's face showed a complacent smile. There was nothing happier than having a beauty in his arms. Li Xiuwen wanted to kill Xiao Yan in prison directly, but Ning Shu didn't agree. It was too easy for Xiao Yan to die like this. He said to Li Xiuwen, "Are you stupid? If Xiao Yan really died in prison, Su Meng would miss him for the rest of her life." Now that the two of them were loving each other passionately, if they suddenly separated, wouldn't it be the most beautiful moment in their memory? Li Xiuwen's face showed a look of understanding. He pointed at the table and said, "That's right. Now is the best time for you to win Xiao Yan's heart. Let's make a bet. Let's see if you can make Xiao Yan fall in love with you first, or Su Meng will fall in love with me first." Ning Shu, fuck off. Why are the people in this world so disgusting? Ning Shu got what she deserved. Now, the Xiao family and the Su family combined were not as rich as her, especially the Xiao family who had no money at all. Xiao Yan's sentence came out. He was sentenced to 2.5 years for hiring a hitman to cause intentional injury. However, Xiao Yan didn't plead guilty. Xiao Yan was domineering and wanted to appeal, but no one cared. The evidence was conclusive. It didn't matter if he pleaded guilty or not. When the Xiao family got the news, they forced Ning Shu to get Xiao Yan out. Ning Shu didn't care about these people at all. Madame Xiao looked at Ning Shu with resentment. During this period of time, Madame Xiao had been in a lot of pain. She had to do everything by herself. Her well-maintained hands had become rough, and she had become haggard. Ning Shu didn't eat at home at all, and Mr. Xiao and Mrs. Xiao didn't have money at all. They had to do the laundry and cook by themselves. Mrs. Xiao, who used to be graceful and elegant, was responsible for everything. Seeing Ning Shu living so comfortably, Madame Xiao was so jealous that her heart was filled with venom. She missed the time when she had servants to serve her. Madame Xiao wanted to act like a mother-in-law, but Ning Shu immediately asked the two of them to get lost. With nowhere to go and no money on them, the two of them were at a loss. Mr. Xiao used his old connections to get Xiao Yan out and borrow some money to make a comeback. He called them, but these people had to deal with Mr. Xiao before. Now, they didn't even answer the phone. Mr. Xiao was so angry that he had high blood pressure. These people who hit a man when he was down, didn't they think about how humble they were before? Now, they immediately became arrogant. Xiao Yan had been in prison for almost a week. Even Su Meng couldn't bear it anymore. Su Meng thought that Mr. Xiao would get Xiao Yan out, but Xiao Yan didn't come out after such a long time. As long as she thought of Xiao Yan's suffering, Su Meng's heart was stirred by a knife. She took the two children to Ning Shu. As soon as Su Meng saw Ning Shu, she knelt in front of Ning Shu and looked at Ning Shu with a pair of eyes that seemed to have suffered extreme pain. Ning Shu shouted, "Su Ran, I know you hate me. You hate me, it has nothing to do with Xiao Yan. Now, Xiao Yan can come out with just a word from you. Do you really have the heart to let him go to prison?" Ning Shu looked at Su Meng incredulously. Xiao Yan had committed a crime. What did she mean that Xiao Yan can come out with just a word from her? Was the law so childish? "Mom, get up, I will find a way to save Dad. You don't have to beg this vicious woman." Su Debao wanted to pull Su Meng up, but Su Meng insisted on kneeling in front of Ning Shu. Su Debao looked at Ning Shu with gloomy and vicious eyes. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.